What if the past is not silent, but waiting? Across continents and centuries, shadows linger where answers should be. Empires collapsed without warning. Entire communities vanished as if erased by an unseen hand. In quiet forests, beneath restless seas, and under ancient stone corridors, traces remain, fragments of stories that refuse to settle into history's neat timelines. What happened in those final hours? Who witnessed the unexplainable and chose never to speak? And why do certain places still feel heavy, as though memory itself clings to the air? Tonight, we step into those unanswered chapters. So sit back, relax, and let's dive in. The wind moves differently at the edge of the world. On a remote cluster of rocks known as the Flannan Isles, the Atlantic does not simply crash, it collides. Waves rise like dark walls, smashing against sheer cliffs of blackened stone. For centuries, these islands were little more than jagged silhouettes off the coast of Isle of Lewis, visited occasionally by shepherds and seabirds. Then, in 1899, a lighthouse was built on the largest of them, Elaine Moor, a tower of pale brick standing in defiance of the sea. Its purpose was practical, even mundane: guide ships safely through treacherous waters. 3 men at a time would serve as keepers, tending the lamp, recording weather conditions, maintaining order against isolation. It was a lonely assignment, but not an unusual one. Lighthouses, after all, have always required patience, discipline, and resilience. In December 1900, something went wrong. On the night of December 15th, the steamer Arctur passed the islands and noted something unsettling. The lighthouse was dark. The report did not immediately trigger alarm. Storms were frequent and minor delays in lighting were possible. But when the relief vessel, the Hesperus, finally reached the island on December 26th, the unease deepened into something harder to define. No one was there to greet them. The lighthouse door was closed. Inside, the beds were unmade but undisturbed. The kitchen table suggested a meal interrupted. One chair was overturned. The clock had stopped. Most curiously, 2 sets of oilskins were missing. Yet one remained hanging on its peg. Lighthouse protocol was strict. No keeper was to leave the station unattended, especially not without proper gear. The 3 men, James Ducat, Thomas Marshall, and Donald MacArthur, had vanished. The official inquiry, led by Northern Lighthouse Board Superintendent Robert Muirhead, concluded that the men had likely been swept away by a rogue wave. Evidence pointed to storm damage on the western landing platform: twisted iron railings, displaced equipment. A heavy box weighing over a ton moved from its original position. It was theorized that 2 keepers had gone out to secure equipment during rough weather, and the 3rd had rushed to help, only for all 3 to be claimed by the sea. It was, and remains, the most widely accepted explanation. The Atlantic is unforgiving, and Eilean Moor offers little mercy to those caught unaware. Yet questions linger. Weather reports from the mainland suggested that the most violent storms in the region occurred after the men were already missing. Why, then, would experienced keepers venture out together during daylight hours, abandoning the post entirely? And what of the final logbook entries? Notes describing intense winds and one keeper unusually quiet. Some later retellings claimed that one entry spoke of a storm, the like of which I have never seen, and of men praying. However, historians caution that these dramatic lines may have been embellishments added years later, not part of the verified record. Still, the human mind searches for pattern where facts fall short. Local folklore long before the lighthouse spoke of the islands as sacred, touched by unseen presences. Shepherds were said to avoid staying overnight. Some suggested that the men had been taken by something not bound to tide charts or meteorological logic. Others speculated about interpersonal conflict, even violence, though no physical evidence ever supported such claims. There are quieter theories, too. A misjudged wave, a single moment of error, a chain reaction of loyalty and instinct that drew each man outside in turn. And perhaps that is what makes the story endure, not the spectacle, but the absence. No bodies were recovered. No final message explained their fate. The lighthouse lamp was relit, and new keepers took their place. Ships continued to pass. The sea resumed its rhythm. But on certain winter nights, when the wind presses low over the water and the rocks of the Flannan Isles disappear into shadow, it is difficult not to wonder what happened in those final minutes on Elian Moor. Was it merely the sea asserting its ancient authority? Or did something occur there that left no trace except silence? If the sea at the Flannan Isles swallowed its secrets in water and wind, the next mystery we encounter is buried in stone and sky. Stretching along the southern edge of Siberia, the Khamar-Daban rises in long, weathered ridges above the vast expanse of Lake Baikal. The terrain is rugged, but not extreme by mountaineering standards. Rolling peaks, alpine meadows, and scattered forests of cedar and larch. In summer, the slopes are painted in muted greens and grays, windswept and quiet beneath an immense sky. It is a place that feels remote, but not otherworldly. Demanding, but not impossible. In August 1993, a group of 7 experienced hikers set out across these mountains under the leadership of Lyudmila Korovina, a respected instructor in hiking and survival. They were young, athletic, and well-trained. Their route was categorized as challenging, yet manageable. The weather, at first, seemed stable. There was no reason to suspect that this journey would become one of the most disturbing mountaineering incidents of the late 20th century. Days into the trek, conditions shifted. Cold rain moved in, driven by relentless wind. Temperatures dropped sharply. On August 5th, as the group traversed an exposed ridge, events took a sudden and catastrophic turn. According to the sole survivor, 17-year-old Valentina Utachenko, one of the hikers collapsed without warning. He began bleeding from his nose and mouth. Soon after, others displayed signs of severe distress, screaming, tearing at their clothing, clutching their throats as though unable to breathe. Within hours, 6 of the 7 hikers were dead. Valentina, disoriented and terrified, fled downslope. She survived alone in the wilderness for several days before encountering another group and being rescued. When search teams later reached the site, they found the bodies scattered across the slope. Some were partially undressed. Others lay face down against the cold earth. The tent remained upright, though partially damaged by wind. The official explanation pointed to hypothermia. In extreme cold, the human body can react in unpredictable ways. As core temperature plummets, victims may experience paradoxical undressing, a sudden sensation of intense heat that compels them to remove clothing. Disorientation, panic, and irrational behavior can follow. Combined with exhaustion, wet conditions, and high winds, the scenario becomes tragically plausible. The ridge offered little shelter. Once one member collapsed, the others may have attempted rescue in worsening conditions, draining their own strength until none could recover. Yet certain details continue to trouble observers. The speed of the collapse was unusual. Witness testimony described sudden bleeding and apparent convulsions. Could hypothermia alone account for such rapid deterioration? Some have suggested high-altitude pulmonary edema, a condition where fluid fills the lungs at elevation, but the Khamar-Daban range, while elevated, does not reach the extreme altitudes typically associated with that illness. Another possibility raised in later discussions was exposure to toxic substances. The region had, in previous decades, been used for military testing and industrial activity. Could lingering contaminants in soil or air have played a role? There is no conclusive evidence to support this theory, but its mere suggestion reflects the unease surrounding the case. More speculative interpretations have drawn comparisons to the infamous Dyatlov Pass incident of 1959, also in Russia. In both cases, experienced hikers perished under mysterious circumstances. In both, there were signs of sudden panic, partial undressing, and chaotic movement across exposed terrain. And in both, official findings leaned toward environmental causes, while public imagination ventured elsewhere. Was there an infrasound phenomenon, low-frequency vibrations generated by wind over ridgelines, that might induce panic or disorientation? Some researchers have proposed that certain wind patterns can create frequencies capable of triggering anxiety, nausea, even hallucinations. In the open expanses of Khamar-Daban, where gusts sweep unimpeded across stone, could such an effect have contributed to the group's breakdown? Others look to more grounded explanations, a combination of hypothermia, exhaustion, and group dynamics under extreme stress. If one hiker experienced a medical emergency, perhaps related to a pre-existing condition, the shock could have destabilized the group. In deteriorating weather, a chain reaction of fear and physical decline might unfold with terrifying speed. Valentina's survival remains a crucial piece of the puzzle. She later described confusion, terror, and an overwhelming instinct to flee. Trauma can distort memory, especially when events occur rapidly and under life-threatening conditions. What she witnessed may never be reconstructed with complete clarity. When investigators closed the case, they cited hypothermia as the prima. From the frozen ridges of Khamar-Daban, where wind and silence concealed a sudden catastrophe, we move now to a hillside overlooking a tropical city, where the air was warm, the sky clear, and yet the questions proved just as enduring. High above the coastal neighborhoods of Niteroi rises a modest grassy elevation known as Morro do Vintém. It is not a dramatic mountain. Children once played along its slopes. Goats grazed there. From its summit, the view stretches toward Guanabara Bay, the horizon shimmering in the heat. On August 20th, 1966, a local boy flying a kite made a discovery that would unsettle Brazil for decades. Lying side by side on the hillside were two men, dressed in formal suits despite the humidity. Their jackets were neatly arranged. Beside them were empty water bottles, a small notebook, and odd, hand-cut masks made of thick lead, shaped to fit over the eyes, like crude sunglasses without lenses. The men were later identified as Miguel José Viana and Manuel Pereira da Cruz, both electronics technicians from Campos dos Goitacazes, a town several hours away. They had told their families they were traveling to purchase equipment. Witnesses in Niteroi recalled seeing them buy raincoats, though the day was dry. One shopkeeper remembered that they appeared calm, polite, entirely unremarkable. And yet, when authorities examined the scene, the details felt anything but ordinary. There were no signs of violence, no visible injuries, no immediate indication of struggle. Toxicology at the time was limited, and the autopsy, delayed due to the heat and condition of the bodies, proved inconclusive. Whatever had caused their deaths left no obvious trace. In the pocket of one man's coat was a small note. Its instructions were cryptic. 1630 be at the specified location. 1830 swallow capsules. After effect, protect metals. Wait for signal mask. The phrasing was strange. What capsules? What signal? And why protect metals? Investigators soon learned that both men were involved in amateur scientific and spiritualist circles. In 1960s Brazil, interest in spiritism, a belief system blending elements of Christianity with communication from spirits, was widespread. Some groups conducted experiments attempting to contact other realms, often blending electronics with mysticism. Radios, magnets, and homemade devices were believed to amplify spiritual frequencies. Could Viana and De Cruz have been attempting such an experiment? One prevailing theory suggested that the capsules mentioned in the note were some form of psychedelic substance, perhaps LSD or another hallucinogen. Under its influence, they may have lain down, donned the lead masks to shield their eyes from an anticipated signal, and succumbed to overdose or exposure. The lead masks themselves may have been intended as protection against radiation or intense light, whether imagined or real, but no capsules were ever found at the scene. The absence of physical evidence complicated the narrative. If they had ingested something, where were the containers? If robbery had occurred, why were their money and valuables left untouched? And why climb Morro do Vintém in formal attire carrying raincoats on a sunny day? More speculative interpretations soon emerged. Some pointed to Brazil's surge of reported UFO sightings during that era. The note's reference to a signal and protective masks fueled rumors that the men were expecting contact, perhaps with extraterrestrial intelligence. In this version of events, the lead masks were meant to shield their eyes from a blinding craft or beam of light. Others looked toward more terrestrial possibilities. Could the men have been experimenting with dangerous chemicals related to their electronics work? Might they have accidentally exposed themselves to toxins that degraded before testing? Or had they been misled, encouraged to participate in a ritual by someone who never arrived? The notebook found at the scene contained references to previous spiritual experiments, including attempts to construct devices for communicating with spirits through electromagnetic means. Friends described the pair as curious, earnest, perhaps impressionable, but not reckless. There were also inconsistencies in witness accounts. Some locals reported seeing a strange orange object hovering above the hill that evening. Others dismissed the claims as rumor, amplified by media attention. No photographs or physical evidence substantiated these sightings, yet the reports persisted. In the years that followed, the lead masks case became woven into Brazil's cultural fabric, a mystery that seemed to sit at the intersection of science, faith, and the unknown. It resisted simple categorization. It was not clearly a crime, nor clearly an accident. It did not fit neatly into narratives of conspiracy or delusion. Standing on Morro do Vintém today, the hillside appears unremarkable. Grass shifts in the breeze. The city hums below. Nothing in the landscape suggests that two men once lay there, staring upward through sheets of heavy metal, waiting for something they believed would come. Were they victims of a miscalculation? An ill-advised experiment with substances or radiation? Did they place too much trust in cryptic instructions and untested ideas? Or were they participants in a ritual that required absolute belief, even in the absence of proof? The lead masks themselves remain the most haunting image. Crude, opaque, deliberately fashioned. They imply preparation, expectation, a moment anticipated with enough certainty to warrant protection. But protection from what? As with so many of history's darkest mysteries, the answers may have dissolved with time, lost to limited forensics, fading memories, and the quiet erosion of context. What remains is a hillside, a handwritten note, and two men who climbed toward something unseen. And somewhere between the rational and the extraordinary, the question lingers. What signal were they waiting for, and did it ever arrive? From the quiet hillside of Niterói, where two men lay waiting for a signal that never came, we return now to a colder, more secluded corner of Europe, a place where the shadows of human intent mingle with the isolation of rural life. Here, the landscape itself seems to guard secrets that refuse to be revealed. In the Bavarian countryside of southern Germany, a small farmstead named Hinterkaifeck sat alone, a few hundred meters from the nearest neighbor. Surrounded by fields, forests, and the distant silhouette of the Alps, it was a farm that seemed ordinary by day. The timber house, barns, and small outbuildings were worn but functional, a testament to generations of quiet labor. Yet beneath the surface of everyday life, an unsettling atmosphere was beginning to take shape. The story begins in March 1922, when the family who lived at Hinterkaifeck, Andreas Gruber, his wife Kazelia, their widowed daughter Victoria, her children Tazelia and Joseph, and the maid, Maria Baumgartner, were going about their usual routines. Neighbors had long noticed oddities: doors and windows mysteriously locked from the inside, unexplained footprints in the snow leading to the house but none leaving it, and the persistent feeling that someone, or something, was lurking near the property. Several days before the tragedy, Andreas reportedly claimed he had been hearing footsteps in the attic, although no one else was home. He mentioned finding a newspaper that no one had delivered and discovering keys missing from their usual place. The sense of unease intensified, but on a farm in rural Bavaria, such anomalies might have been attributed to natural causes, pranks, or the imagination. On the night of March 31st, or in the early hours of April 1st, the family and their maid were brutally murdered. The method was shockingly intimate. A mattock, a heavy farming tool, was used to kill all 6 inhabitants. The bodies were discovered days later by a neighbor after the house went silent, untouched by the usual chores and routines. No one had seen or heard the crime, and nothing was stolen. The house appeared undisturbed in terms of entry points, save for some signs suggesting someone had been living there unnoticed for days. The investigation uncovered unsettling details. Footprints leading from the forest to the house suggested the killer, or killers, had carefully approached. The farm itself seemed to have been observed in advance. A newspaper in the home indicated that Andreas had been reading the day before the murders, hinting that he had lived with the intruder's presence for some time without knowing it. Inside the house, small disturbances, tools out of place, objects shifted, added to the sense that the family's private world had been quietly penetrated. Speculation about the perpetrator began immediately. Locals proposed a range of possibilities: a disgruntled former employee, a spurned lover, or a neighbor harboring resentment. Some suggested the murders were connected to inheritance disputes or family grudges. Yet no concrete evidence pointed definitively to any suspect. Even confessions and tips from alleged witnesses failed to produce clarity. Over the decades, more speculative theories emerged. Could a transient criminal have stumbled upon the farm? Some accounts suggest the possibility of a lone deranged individual who followed the family for days. Others propose a premeditated act, with the murderer having observed the household for weeks, perhaps hiding in the attic or the barns before striking. The eerie suggestion that someone had been living undetected within the very walls of Hinterkaifeck is difficult to dismiss entirely. After all, neighbors reported hearing activity that no one could explain. Psychological and cultural interpretations also colored the mystery. Some historians and writers speculated that the murders reflected a broader tension in post-World War I Bavaria. Social upheaval, economic hardship, and personal resentment might have converged in acts of sudden, violent expression. Yet these remain conjecture, contextual layers that provide plausible motivation but never a definitive answer. Even physical evidence yields questions rather than conclusions. The sequence of the murders, the careful yet brutal method, the lack of theft, and the seemingly premeditated observation of the family all suggest a perpetrator of unusual cunning. Could more than one person have been involved? Was the intruder known to the family, exploiting familiarity to gain access? Or was this a random act of extreme violence that happened to unfold with almost impossible timing and precision? Standing today on the Hinterkaifeck property, the land appears tranquil. The house is gone, replaced by markers and memory. Forest and fields stretch outward, as silent now as they were in 1922. The rhythm of daily life has returned, yet the echoes of that night linger, not in noise, but in absence, in the unresolved tension between what is known and what is unknowable. The Hinterkaifeck Murders endure as a study of both human darkness and the mysteries that rural isolation can conceal. The ordinary tools of a farm, the simple routines of a family, and the quiet, dense forests together create a stage where horror unfolded silently, leaving questions without answers. Who approached the farm that night? What had they planned, and how long had they been observing? And perhaps most haunting, did the family sense their fate, and if so, what did they think in those final moments when footsteps echoed in the attic and shadows moved across familiar walls? In Hinterkaifeck, the ordinary became inexplicably sinister, and the mundane tools of life, a mattock, a key, a simple house, became instruments of a crime that refuses to be fully understood. Even now, as wind brushes the remaining fields and the forest exhales its quiet, the unanswered questions hang in the air, waiting for the mind to wander back to that isolated Bavarian hillside, to imagine what still might be hidden there. From the quiet isolation of Hinterkaifeck, where shadows of human intent and rural solitude converged in a night of unimaginable violence, we turn now to the suburbs of Melbourne, Australia, an ordinary schoolyard where the extraordinary briefly interrupted everyday life. In the spring of 1966, the grounds of Westall High School in Clayton, a suburban area southeast of central Melbourne, appeared typical in every respect. Students played across neatly kept fields, classrooms buzzed with lessons, and the ordinary rhythms of adolescence carried forward in mild spring weather. Yet, on the morning of April 6th, a peculiar sight began to unfold, one that would leave a lasting imprint on those who witnessed it. Around 11 a.m., a group of students and staff noticed a silvery, disc-shaped object descending in a nearby field. Eyewitness accounts describe it as metallic, roughly circular, and hovering above the grass before abruptly rising and disappearing over the horizon. Some reported a thrumming sound, others a sudden rush of wind, as if the air itself were disturbed by an unseen force. The object's presence was brief, but intense enough to draw attention and spark confusion. Teachers quickly urged students back into classrooms, yet many continued to watch from windows or doorways. Approximately 200 students and several staff members claim to have observed the phenomenon, providing one of the most widely documented mass sightings of unidentified aerial objects in Australia. Witnesses described details with striking consistency. A gray or silver disc, 3 legs or supports beneath it, and a size comparable to a small aircraft. Authorities were called to investigate, but the response was cautious. Local police arrived at the scene but reported finding no physical evidence. The field appeared undisturbed except for faint impressions in the grass, though no vehicle tracks, debris, or chemical residue could be confirmed. The Victorian Department of Education later advised staff to discourage discussion, and official records remained sparse, adding an air of institutional secrecy to the event. Media coverage was limited at the time, primarily consisting of brief newspaper mentions, yet local memory preserved the incident. Eyewitnesses recall a strange sense of urgency in teachers' voices and a visible anxiety among some students. Several children reported that after the craft departed, mysterious figures, described as plainclothes men, appeared on the grounds, photographing the area and questioning them briefly before leaving. No official explanation for these individuals was ever provided. Speculation has since flourished. Some have suggested misidentification of a weather balloon or a small aircraft. Others argue that atmospheric conditions, light reflections, clouds, or mirages might account for visual distortions. Yet the scale of the observation, combined with detailed sketches by students and corroborating accounts from staff, challenges purely conventional interpretations. More fringe theories have been proposed over the decades. Could it have been an experimental aircraft, classified and unknown to the public? Was it an encounter with extraterrestrial technology, glimpsed in the suburban fields of Melbourne? Some researchers point to the phenomenon's effects on those who witnessed it. Lingering anxiety, recurring dreams of the object, and the vividness of memory decades later. These accounts suggest a psychological as well as physical encounter, one that imprinted itself upon consciousness even in the absence of tangible evidence. The Westall sighting is also remarkable for its context. The mid-1960s were a period of heightened interest in space exploration and aerial phenomena worldwide. Sightings were reported across Australia, the United States, and Europe. Yet what distinguishes Westall is the mass nature of the observation and the apparent immediacy with which witnesses were instructed to remain silent or downplay the event. The interplay between ordinary school life and extraordinary experience created a tension that remains compelling. A familiar world interrupted by something wholly unfamiliar. In the years since, researchers have revisited archival records, interviewed surviving witnesses, and examined meteorological data. Some suggest the object may have been a small experimental glider launched from nearby airfields. Others argue that the reports are too consistent and numerous to be dismissed as illusion or rumor. Contemporary accounts describe a sense of presence, of something alien or deliberate hovering just beyond comprehension. Standing on the same playing fields today, it is easy to imagine ordinary students running across the grass, unaware of the moment that would later haunt recollections. There is no physical trace of the craft, no lingering imprint beyond memory, and yet, for those who were there, the memory persists in vivid detail. The shape, the sound, the strange urgency in the air. The Westall school incident endures as a case that challenges the boundary between mundane reality and unexplained phenomena. What exactly descended into that suburban field? Were the witnesses seeing an experimental aircraft, a rare atmospheric anomaly, or something beyond contemporary understanding? And perhaps most intriguingly, why did the authorities act in such a manner as to discourage discussion, leaving unanswered questions in the minds of hundreds of students and staff? The answers remain elusive, hidden somewhere between perception, memory, and the limits of investigation. As we imagine the quiet fields of Westall, the ordinary schoolyard still seems capable of hosting the extraordinary. The object that day may have disappeared from sight, but it has not disappeared from thought. And so the question lingers. What truly passed over those fields, and why did it leave such an indelible mark on those who saw it? From the quiet fields of Westall, where ordinary school children glimpsed something extraordinary hovering above their suburban playground, we move now to the shadowed heart of a bustling city, a park where the laughter of children once mingled with the murmurs of history, and where tragedy would transform a familiar landscape into a place of lingering questions. Stanley Park, stretching across more than 400 hectares of urban forest in Vancouver, has long been a sanctuary of towering evergreens, winding trails, and hidden glades. In the summer of 1947, the park was alive with families and children playing beneath sun-dappled canopies, unaware that the forest could conceal a darkness few could have imagined. The park's combination of natural beauty and isolated corners created a sense of safety, yet also provided the perfect setting for a crime that would haunt the city for decades. On a quiet afternoon in the late summer, the bodies of two children were discovered in a secluded area of Stanley Park. They were siblings, aged 6 and 8, and their deaths sent shockwaves through the local community. Found partially concealed among thick undergrowth, the children bore evidence of violent strangulation. The scene was horrifying, yet meticulous. There were no signs of struggle beyond the initial attack, no indication that the victims had been left in haste. The investigation immediately drew the attention of law enforcement and the public alike. Vancouver police, assisted by detectives from nearby jurisdictions, meticulously combed the park for clues. Eyewitness accounts were scarce. Few had seen the children in the moments leading up to their deaths, and the area where they were found was rarely traversed at that hour. The discovery ignited a wave of fear and speculation as parents questioned whether the familiar paths of Stanley Park could still be trusted. Authorities focused first on the immediate circle of the children's lives. Neighbors, family members, and acquaintances were interviewed repeatedly, but no clear suspect emerged. Physical evidence was limited to fibers and footprints, which were analyzed using the investigative techniques available at the time. Despite these efforts, the trail quickly went cold. The children's mother and father cooperated fully with the investigation, yet the absence of concrete leads left the case frustratingly unresolved. Speculation and theory soon filled the gaps left by fact. Some suggested a predatory individual had seized the opportunity provided by the park's dense foliage. Others proposed a more sinister scenario, involving planned abduction and concealment before a violent act. A small number of fringe theorists posited connections to ritualistic or cult-related activity, citing patterns observed in other unsolved child murders from the era. While these theories remain unproven, they reflect the human need to impose structure and meaning on events that resist easy explanation. The timeline of the children's disappearance adds another layer of intrigue. Reports indicate they were last seen playing in the park in the late morning. By mid-afternoon, they were unaccounted for. The window of opportunity was narrow, yet investigators could not reconstruct the exact movements of either child. How did the perpetrator approach without being noticed? How could the act occur in a public park without witnesses? And why choose this secluded spot, so intimately entwined with the natural rhythm of the city, rather than a more isolated location? Physical traces at the scene, including disturbed leaves and faint tracks leading into dense undergrowth, suggested the possibility of movement before or after the crime. Yet forensic limitations of the 1940s prevented investigators from confirming the precise sequence of events. Even today, modern techniques applied to historical cases can offer only limited clarity, leaving the details largely shrouded in speculation. Cultural memory of the Babes in the Wood murders has been shaped as much by narrative as by evidence. The image of innocent children hidden in the forest resonates as a universal symbol of vulnerability. It also amplifies the unease surrounding Stanley Park, an urban green space transformed by tragedy into a place both cherished and feared. Writers, journalists, and local historians have revisited the case repeatedly, exploring possible suspects, motives, and connections, yet none have produced conclusive results. Psychological interpretations offer additional perspective. The randomness of opportunity in such crimes often suggests a perpetrator attuned to situational advantage rather than long-term planning. Yet the apparent care taken to position the bodies and leave minimal traces raises questions. Did the killer act impulsively or with forethought? Was there an understanding of law enforcement methods that guided their behavior? Or did the perpetrator exploit an instinctive knowledge of the park's layout and the human tendency to overlook certain areas? Standing today in Stanley Park, the trails wind peacefully beneath ancient trees. Joggers pass, cyclists weave through shaded paths, and children's laughter echoes across open fields. Yet the memory of 1947 lingers in the quiet corners, where sunlight filters unevenly through dense foliage. The park is unchanged, yet history has left its mark. The shadows of that day remain, not only in the city's records, but in the collective consciousness of those who continue to wonder what truly occurred in the undergrowth. The Babes in the Wood murders endure as a reminder that even familiar spaces can harbor incomprehensible darkness. The evidence suggests neither random accident nor careless oversight. Something deliberate occurred. And yet, after decades of investigation, no perpetrator has been definitively identified. Who observed the children first? How did the perpetrator choose the moment and location? And ultimately, why did the trail vanish so completely, leaving only grief and unanswered questions? In Stanley Park, the trees stand as silent witnesses, guarding secrets that may never be uncovered, and inviting the imagination to linger in the spaces between knowledge and uncertainty. From the quiet shadows of Stanley Park, where children vanished into the undergrowth and the forest held its secrets, we now travel to the heart of rural America in the early 20th century. A small, unassuming town where ordinary life would be shattered by an act of sudden and incomprehensible violence. Villisca, Iowa, in June 1912, was a town of quiet streets, modest homes, and a community bound together by familiarity and routine. The Josiah B. Moore household, a 2-story frame home on a corner lot, stood as a symbol of middle-class respectability. The Moore family, Josiah, his wife Sarah, their 4 children, and 2 visiting friends, were known as industrious, kind, and deeply rooted in the rhythms of town life. At first glance, nothing about the house suggested the horrors that would soon unfold within its walls. The evening of June 9th, 1912, began unremarkably. The family attended to chores, the children played, and neighbors exchanged casual greetings as the sun dipped below the horizon. By nightfall, the streets of Villisca were quiet, the town lulled by a sense of ordinary security. But within the Moore home, something malevolent had already arrived. When morning came, the household was discovered in a scene that would haunt Iowa and the nation for decades. Every member of the Moore family, along with their 2 young guests, had been bludgeoned to death with an axe. The bodies were found in their beds, faces covered in blood, some still clutching the blankets around them. The weapon, a common household axe, lay nearby, but there were no fingerprints that conclusively pointed to a perpetrator. Windows and doors were locked from the inside. There was no evidence of forced entry. The crime was clean, deliberate, and chilling in its intimacy. Local law enforcement, along with state investigators, combed the home for clues. They examined the floors, the furniture, and the surrounding property for traces of the assailant. Footprints and fingerprints proved inconclusive. Suspicion fell on neighbors, itinerant workers, and even those with distant grudges, but no evidence could confirm guilt. The lack of motive and the precision of the attack deepened the sense of unease. How could someone penetrate a seemingly secure home, commit such a violent act, and leave with nothing to mark their presence? Several theories emerged almost immediately. Some speculated that the crime was the work of a transient with a history of violence, a drifter passing through a small town where opportunity met preparation. Others looked toward darker human impulses closer to home, personal grudges, jealousy, or revenge. Investigators even considered whether someone with a pathological fixation had carefully selected the Moore household as a target. Yet none of these explanations could fully account for the crime's meticulous execution, the simultaneous deaths, and the lack of evidence pointing to any specific individual. More speculative interpretations have persisted over the decades. Some writers have suggested the possibility of ritualistic or symbolic motives, citing patterns in the arrangement of the bodies and the use of a common household object as the weapon. Others have theorized about psychological phenomena, such as the detached focus of a serial offender or a carefully concealed vendetta against the family. A few have even considered the unlikely but persistent notion of supernatural involvement, born of the human tendency to seek answers when rational explanations fail. While these theories remain unproven, they illustrate the complexity and enduring fascination of the case. Eyewitness accounts added to the intrigue. Neighbors reported hearing unusual noises during the night, cries, thuds, or footsteps, though none could confirm the direction or source. Some remembered a light in the Moore home, others a shadow passing a window, yet all recollections were fragmented, contradictory, or too vague to form a definitive narrative. The accumulation of these partial observations, however, contributed to a persistent aura of mystery, the sense that someone or something moved unseen among familiar streets. In the months and years following the murders, multiple suspects were brought to trial. Several men were charged and acquitted. Alibis, witness testimony, and circumstantial evidence failed to produce a conviction. Each attempt to close the case raised further questions. Was the killer among the known townspeople, quietly observing the investigation? Or had they vanished entirely, leaving Villisca with nothing but grief and unanswered questions? Standing today at the site of the Josiah Moore home, the quiet of the street seems at odds with the horror that occurred over a century ago. Modern houses occupy the neighborhood, yet the echoes of that June night linger in memory and local lore. The precision, the brutality, and the absence of motive create a tension between what we understand about human behavior and what defies explanation. The Villisca Axe Murders endure as a study in both human malevolence and the limits of investigative certainty. They raise questions that extend beyond the particulars of 1912. How could such violence unfold in an ordinary household without detection? Why did the perpetrator select this family at this moment in time? And how does a small town absorb the shock of a crime so intimate, so inexplicable, without losing its sense of safety entirely? Even now, the murder scene, though long altered by time, continues to provoke reflection. The intersection of ordinary life, sudden violence, and enduring mystery offers a stark reminder that history often contains spaces where reason meets uncertainty. What truly happened in the Moore household that night? Who carried out the act, and what drove them? And perhaps most hauntingly, why has justice in the form of closure or understanding never arrived to illuminate the shadows left behind? In Villisca, the questions remain. The town moves forward, yet the past persists, a silent companion to those who dare to look closely at the empty streets, the modest homes, and the spaces between knowledge and the unknown. From the quiet streets of Villisca, where the ordinary home concealed an unimaginable act of violence, we now shift from land to sea, to the vast and indifferent expanse of the Pacific Ocean. A place where isolation amplifies mystery, and where a single distress signal would leave a lasting enigma on maritime history. In late June 1947, the waters of the South China Sea were calm but unrelenting, stretching in endless shades of blue beneath a cloudless sky. Shipping routes crisscrossed this strategic maritime corridor, vessels carrying goods, passengers, and occasional whispers of stories yet untold. Among them was the Ourang Medan, a Dutch freighter whose name would become synonymous with one of the most chilling and inexplicable events of the post-war era. The first indication of trouble arrived not from the ship itself, but through the crackling channels of maritime radio. Distress signals from the Ourang Medan reached nearby vessels with urgency and peculiar phrasing. All officers, including captain, dead on bridge, possibly entire crew dead. Following the initial report, a series of incoherent messages ensued, punctuated by bursts of static and garbled phrases that conveyed terror without explanation. Then, silence. Responding to the distress, the Silver Star, a nearby freighter, altered course to investigate. When the Silver Star approached the coordinates relayed in the last transmission, the scene aboard the Ourang Medan was more unsettling than any description could convey. Crew members who boarded the ship reportedly found it eerily silent. In the officers' quarters, bodies lay sprawled in unnatural positions, eyes wide, mouths open in a frozen expression of horror. Some were discovered on the bridge, others in the living quarters or passageways, as if struck suddenly and simultaneously by some unseen force. There were no visible signs of violence or struggle. No external attack had breached the hull, and no weapon was present. The cargo hold appeared intact, the navigation logs undisturbed. Even more disturbing, those who examined the bodies noted a peculiar rigidity, almost as if the victims had experienced extreme terror in their final moments. The phenomenon defied conventional explanation, suggesting a rapid onset of death under circumstances entirely unknown. Speculation about the cause of the deaths began immediately. Some proposed accidental chemical exposure, possibly from hazardous cargo stored improperly, a plausible hypothesis given that freighters often carried industrial substances. Others considered carbon monoxide poisoning, a known hazard in engine compartments and poorly ventilated areas of ships. However, investigators noted that the positions and expressions of the bodies suggested a sudden shock inconsistent with gradual asphyxiation, leaving these theories partially unsatisfactory. More speculative interpretations captured the imagination of the maritime community and the wider public. Could an uncharted natural phenomenon have generated toxic gases? Perhaps a reaction between cargo materials and the tropical heat produced lethal airborne compounds. Some even considered paranormal or extraterrestrial involvement, influenced by the sudden, simultaneous deaths and the sheer isolation of the vessel in the open sea. While no evidence substantiated such claims, the enduring mystery continues to fuel these discussions. The ship's fate compounded the enigma. According to some accounts, shortly after boarding, crew members observed smoke or flames emanating from the vessel, leading to a hasty evacuation. The Ourang Medan reportedly exploded or sank soon afterward, leaving no possibility for direct forensic analysis. Skeptics have questioned the veracity of these accounts, noting inconsistencies in maritime logs and second-hand reports. Yet multiple independent testimonies describe the event with strikingly similar details, lending a degree of credibility to the narrative. Eyewitness descriptions emphasized the unnatural stillness and silence aboard the ship. Personal effects remained in place, untouched by panic. The bodies, though grotesque in death, suggested that whatever occurred was sudden, overwhelming, and perhaps incomprehensible to the human mind. Investigators noted no defensive wounds, no signs of fire damage prior to evacuation, and no evidence of mechanical failure sufficient to explain the phenomenon. Over the decades, the Ourang Medan case has inspired books, articles, and documentaries, each attempting to reconcile the facts with plausible explanations. Chemical accidents remain the most grounded theory, yet they fail to account for the apparent terror etched on the faces of the crew. Environmental factors, such as methane gas releases from the seabed or sudden electromagnetic phenomena, have been proposed, though evidence is speculative at best. The ship's sinking prevents definitive analysis, leaving researchers reliant on survivor testimony and maritime records. Standing now in imagination upon the deck of the Silver Star, looking toward the coordinates where the Ourang Medan once drifted, the sea seems both calm and limitless. The horizon stretches without boundary, indifferent to human fear or loss. The emptiness reinforces the isolation of those aboard the Dutch freighter, and the silence that followed their final distress signals amplifies the mystery. The Ourang Medan incident endures as a story of sudden, inexplicable mortality at sea. It is a case where conventional explanations, accidents, toxins, or human error brush against the limits of understanding, leaving gaps filled only by conjecture. Did a chemical reaction overwhelm the crew in an instant? Was there some mechanical or environmental anomaly unknown at the time? Or did the event remain a unique convergence of circumstances that the human mind struggles to reconstruct? For those who study maritime history, the story resonates as both cautionary tale and puzzle. The details are fragmentary, the records incomplete, yet the psychological imprint remains vivid. The fear, confusion, and sudden death experienced aboard that freighter continue to provoke questions about what can be observed, measured, and explained in the natural world. Somewhere in the vast expanse of the South China Sea, the Ourang Medan rests beneath layers of water, carrying with it the unresolved horror of that day. And the question lingers, as enduring as the waves themselves. What truly happened on that Dutch freighter? And why did its crew perish in a manner so sudden, so uniform, and so terrifying that even today, decades later, no definitive answer can be found? From the restless waters of the South China Sea, where the Ourang Medan vanished into the depths leaving only terror and unanswered questions, we return now to a small American town in the Appalachian foothills, where a family home burned in the dead of night, and 5 children disappeared without a trace, leaving a mystery that continues to haunt decades later. On the evening of December 24, 1945, in Fayetteville, West Virginia, the Sodder family's modest home sat quiet beneath the winter sky. Smoke from wood-burning stoves mingled with the crisp night air, and the lights of nearby houses twinkled through the darkness. Outside, the mountains and valleys of the region were shrouded in deep shadow, their slopes muffling sound and movement. Inside, George and Jenny Sodder, along with their 10 children, prepared for the approaching Christmas holiday. It was an ordinary night, marked by ordinary routines, yet ordinary would soon give way to something deeply unsettling. Shortly after midnight, a fire erupted in the Sodder home. George and Jenny awoke to the smell of smoke, to flames licking at the walls, to the crackle of fire consuming wood and timber. Panic set in as they struggled to escape. 5 of their children were accounted for, immediately visible and reachable, but the other 5, ages ranging from 2 to 9, were never seen again. In the confusion, George and Jenny attempted to rescue the missing children, but the intensity of the fire forced them back. By the time neighbors arrived, the house was a ruin, reduced to ash and rubble. The missing children were presumed dead, yet no remains were ever found, an absence that has fueled speculation ever since. Initial investigations suggested the fire may have been accidental. Faulty wiring, chimneys, and heating stoves were considered plausible causes, yet investigators quickly encountered anomalies. George Sodder and several neighbors reported seeing strange vehicles and unfamiliar individuals in the area that evening. A neighbor claimed to have seen a truck parked nearby at an unusual hour, its occupants acting suspiciously. George himself noted a ladder propped against the house earlier that night, a detail dismissed by local authorities but remembered with increasing unease over the years. The lack of physical evidence intensified the mystery. After the fire, searches revealed no human remains in the ashes. The absence of bone fragments, teeth, or even scorched clothing corresponding to the missing children defied conventional expectations. Fire investigators later suggested that the intensity of the blaze should have left identifiable traces, yet none were recovered. This gap between expectation and reality became a central question. Were the children lost to the fire, or had something else occurred entirely? The Sodder family never stopped searching. George and Jenny pursued leads that ranged from the mundane to the extraordinary. They received anonymous phone calls suggesting the children might have been kidnapped, possibly in retaliation for political connections. George, who had campaigned against Mussolini and expressed anti-fascist sentiments in the years prior, considered the possibility of deliberate abduction by foreign agents or local sympathizers. These suspicions were fueled by an envelope containing a cryptic message mailed to the Sodders months later, which read only, "Your children are alive. They are well cared for. Wait for our instructions." Over the decades, various theories emerged. Some suggested the children had perished in the fire despite the lack of remains. Others proposed a calculated kidnapping, with the children sold or adopted into other families, perhaps as pawns in political or criminal schemes. Some researchers noted patterns of suspicious activity in the town. Unusual phone calls, unidentified individuals observed near the property, and reports of unmarked vehicles at odd hours. Yet none of these leads produced conclusive evidence. Even more speculative theories have persisted in popular accounts. Could the children have been taken for organized crime purposes, perhaps to conceal a larger conspiracy? Did they survive only to be relocated into a hidden life far from the mountains of West Virginia? Reports surfaced over the years claiming sightings of children resembling the Sodders in various states and cities, though verification proved impossible. The family followed each lead, sometimes decades later, yet each trail seemed to vanish into the ether. The psychological dimension of the case is equally compelling. The Sodders' perseverance transformed them into both participants and chroniclers of their own tragedy. The uncertainty, the absence of closure, exerts a weight that pure fact cannot quantify. Without remains or definitive proof, the line between hope and despair blurred. The fire became not only a physical event, but a symbol of absence, of unanswered questions, and of human resilience confronted with incomprehensible loss. In addition to witness reports and personal accounts, the architecture of the home and its surroundings added further intrigue. The Sodder house had multiple exits, yet the missing children were never found in any of the nearby escape routes. The topography of the surrounding hillside and wooded areas allowed for concealment, yet exhaustive searches revealed no traces. Could someone have intercepted the children as they fled, or did an external actor orchestrate their disappearance before the fire began? The absence of answers invites both reflection and speculation. Public fascination with the Sodder case has endured, amplified by media coverage, documentaries, and books detailing the unusual circumstances. Each retelling emphasizes the extraordinary combination of ordinary domestic life, sudden catastrophe, and enduring uncertainty. The intersection of historical context, the immediate post-war period, regional politics, and social conditions, with the deeply personal tragedy of one family gives the story a haunting resonance. Standing today on the ridge where the Sodder home once stood, one can imagine the mountains looming quietly, indifferent to human tragedy. Winter winds sweep through the valleys, carrying with them echoes of Christmases past. The fire has long since consumed the physical structure, yet the absence of the children leaves a lingering void, an enduring question that neither time nor investigation has filled. The Sodder children disappearance remains one of the most enigmatic cases of 20th century America. Was the fire a tragic accident, concealing a deliberate act of abduction? Did the children survive, only to be hidden away, their identities erased or altered? Or did a combination of circumstance, timing, and unknown actors create a scenario in which the truth remains forever just out of reach? In Fayetteville, the Winter Mountains stand as silent witnesses, guarding secrets that have persisted for more than 7 decades. And as we consider the story of the Sodder children, the question remains: what truly happened that December night? And where, if anywhere, did those 5 young lives go? The answers remain elusive, waiting perhaps in memory, in shadow, or in some hidden corner of history for the world to uncover. From the snow-blanketed mountains of West Virginia, where unanswered questions about missing children linger in the crisp Appalachian air, we now journey northward to the frozen and remote reaches of the Ural Mountains in the Soviet Union, where an expedition in 1959 ended in one of the most chilling and enduring mysteries of the 20th century. While the story of the Dyatlov Pass is widely known, the debate surrounding the secondary evidence, the photographs, physical traces, and artifacts discovered after the initial investigation, continues to provoke questions as haunting as the tragedy itself. The Ural Mountains, stretching in jagged ridges and dense forests, are a place where the weather dominates life. In late February 1959, temperatures plunged well below minus 30 degrees Celsius, and fierce winds scoured the barren slopes. Snowdrifts concealed treacherous terrain, while icy rivers and dense pine forests created natural obstacles that could isolate even the most experienced travelers. Within this landscape, a group of 9 experienced hikers, led by Igor Dyatlov, embarked on a winter trek intended to challenge both skill and endurance. Their goal was the remote O'Torton Mountain, but what unfolded instead would leave the world grappling with a perplexing tragedy. When the hikers failed to return on schedule, search parties were dispatched. What they discovered over the following weeks stunned both investigators and the public. The group's tent, partially collapsed and cut from the inside, was found on a gentle slope, footprints leading away from it into the freezing expanse. The first bodies were discovered near the forest line, barefoot in only partial clothing, as if fleeing some unseen terror. Over subsequent weeks, the remaining hikers were located, some at considerable distances from the tent, with injuries that defied simple explanation: fractured skulls, broken ribs, and, in at least 2 cases, internal trauma inconsistent with normal accidents. Beyond the primary scene of the disaster, secondary evidence added layers of intrigue and complexity. Among the items recovered were personal effects, cameras, and photographs taken in the days leading up to the incident. The photographs captured moments of routine camping, smiles in the snow, and preparation for the climb. Yet juxtaposed against these images were haunting anomalies: footprints leading in unusual directions, sleds left abandoned, and clothing that appeared oddly layered or altered, suggesting hasty decisions in extreme conditions. Investigators and researchers have long debated the meaning of these traces. Radiation readings recorded on some of the hikers' clothing further fueled speculation. While measurements were modest, their mere presence introduced questions about possible exposure to unknown sources. Could the group have encountered a natural radioactive anomaly? Or were these readings artifacts of later handling? Were they connected to the injuries observed? Or are they red herrings, magnified in the fog of legend? Such secondary evidence complicates attempts to separate fact from conjecture. Eyewitness accounts from local populations, though scarce, added subtle but intriguing details. Some residents reported strange lights on the mountain in the days preceding the incident, suggesting phenomena ranging from rare atmospheric events to experimental aircraft activity. While such reports remain anecdotal, they intersect with the secondary evidence: the positions of bodies, the disorder of the campsite, and the presence of unusual clothing, creating a tableau that challenges straightforward interpretation. Official Soviet investigations concluded that a compelling natural force had caused the deaths, yet this phrasing left the underlying mechanisms ambiguous. Avalanches were proposed, though subsequent geological analysis raised questions about slope angles and snow conditions at the site. Hypothermia explains some behavior, removing clothing, running barefoot, but cannot fully account for traumatic injuries. Secondary evidence, including personal notes and diaries recovered from backpacks, revealed nothing of imminent fear or danger, heightening the mystery of why the hikers fled their tent so abruptly. In subsequent decades, researchers revisited the evidence with modern techniques. Some proposed that katabatic winds, powerful downward gusts of icy air, may have struck the hikers, forcing them to flee and sustaining internal injuries. Others considered infrasound, a natural phenomenon capable of inducing panic in humans exposed to certain frequencies. Still, anomalies in the secondary evidence, including traces of missing time and unexplained movement patterns across the snowfield, resist complete explanation. The physical state of the site itself continues to spark debate. The arrangement of the bodies, the distances between the hikers, and the state of the tent suggest a complex sequence of events, not a single simple accident. Photographs of footprints and sleds hint at movement, but the lack of eyewitness verification leaves interpretation open. Could there have been external observers, or did environmental forces alone create patterns that mislead investigators? The secondary evidence offers clues but never answers definitively. Psychologically, the Dyatlov Pass case resonates because it merges human vulnerability with an environment that is both beautiful and deadly. The hikers were well prepared, skilled, and experienced, Yet their training did not protect them from the unknown variables that night. The secondary evidence, the subtle traces in photographs, objects left behind, and anomalies in terrain and clothing, serves as a reminder of how fragile perception is when confronted with extreme conditions. Every artifact recovered, every trace recorded, becomes a focal point for questions rather than conclusions. Even today, expeditions return to Dyatlov Pass to retrace steps and examine old traces, including photographs of footprints, personal belongings, and the landscape itself. Scientists, mountaineers, and amateur sleuths alike attempt to reconcile these secondary pieces with the primary narrative. Each new interpretation adds texture, yet none closes the case. Each discovery reinforces the notion that the event was both sudden and extraordinary, occurring in a space where human understanding remains limited. Standing now on the slopes of Kholat-Syakhl, with wind whipping through the alpine ridges, the isolation of the pass is palpable. Snow drifts conceal hazards, pine forests mute sound, the sky shifts quickly from clear to storm-laden. One can imagine the hikers, compelled to leave the warmth of the tent, navigating treacherous terrain in a state of confusion, fear, or injury. The secondary evidence, the scattered belongings, photographs, and unusual traces, forms a silent record of decisions, panic, and perhaps unknown forces that will never fully be explained. The Dyatlov Pass secondary evidence controversy endures because it invites questions rather than answers. What role did environmental conditions play? Were the hikers fleeing from a natural catastrophe, an unseen threat, or some combination of both? How should investigators interpret the fragmented traces left behind when every artifact simultaneously illuminates and obscures the truth? As we gaze across the frozen expanse, the mountains themselves seem indifferent, as if preserving a secret that spans decades. The evidence, primary and secondary, remains frozen in place, waiting for understanding that may never come. And the question persists, echoing across time and snow. What truly unfolded on the slopes of Dyatlov Pass that February night, and what hidden details in the scattered evidence might someday reveal the answers that history still withholds. From the icy slopes of Dyatlov Pass, where human endurance met a lethal combination of fear and the unknown, we now return to a quieter, more domestic setting, yet one where terror manifested not through natural forces, but through inexplicable phenomena that transformed an ordinary English household into a stage for the unexplainable. Seacroft Grange, a modest country home in Seacroft, was typical of the post-war English countryside. Brick walls, slate roof, and a neatly tended garden, nestled amid rolling fields and quiet lanes. In early 1954, it became the epicenter of a series of events that would be remembered as one of Britain's most compelling poltergeist cases. The family residing there, the Whites, a middle-class household of 4, had experienced nothing unusual before, and yet the ordinary rhythms of life were about to be disrupted in ways no one could have anticipated. The first incidents were subtle, objects shifting inexplicably, furniture slightly out of place, small items disappearing only to reappear elsewhere. At first, the family dismissed these occurrences as forgetfulness, misplacement, or the natural creaks and groans of an older home. Yet within weeks, the phenomena escalated. Doors slammed shut without cause, lights flickered, and heavy objects were hurled across rooms. Windows opened and closed of their own accord, and strange knocking sounds echoed through hallways, punctuating the silence with an eerie cadence. Local authorities were initially skeptical. Police officers and neighbors who visited reported minor disturbances, but nothing overtly threatening. Yet the consistency and intensity of the events, as reported by the family and corroborated by visitors, defied easy explanation. Items were observed to move when no one was near. Small fires appeared spontaneously in unused fireplaces. and in one striking incident, a heavy chair reportedly propelled itself across the living room, narrowly missing a family member. Investigators from paranormal research societies soon became involved, drawn by the combination of documented activity and eyewitness testimony. They noted patterns that seemed to suggest intelligence behind the movements. Some objects appeared to be thrown in direct response to the presence of the family, or in reaction to observers attempting to record the events. Could this indicate a conscious force at work, or merely a trick of physics amplified by expectation and fear? The line between the observable and the imagined became increasingly blurred. Photographs and written reports from the period provide additional enigmatic context. Blurred images captured fleeting shapes, while detailed logs described sequences of activity that could not be attributed to wind, settling foundations, or human intervention. Some researchers posited that the poltergeist activity coincided with periods of heightened emotional stress within the household, a hypothesis common in parapsychology. Could the disturbances have been manifestations of subconscious energy, externalized through objects? Or was there a more tangible, external force at play, as yet unidentified? Neighbors provided their own observations. Windows rattled at odd hours, lights flickered across the street, and fleeting shadows appeared in adjacent fields. While anecdotal, these reports reinforced the sense that the phenomenon was not confined to the interior of Seacroft Grange, suggesting an intensity and reach that conventional explanations struggled to encompass. Yet the lack of empirical proof, combined with the fleeting nature of the incidents, ensured that the events remained tantalizingly elusive. Skeptics have offered alternative interpretations. Trickery, hoaxes, and exaggeration were considered possibilities, particularly given the post-war fascination with the supernatural in Britain. Psychological explanations, stress, suggestion, or mass hysteria have also been proposed. Yet the consistency of witness accounts, particularly those from neutral observers such as police and research society members, challenges purely rational explanations. Items moved in clear patterns, often in ways that implied observation or interaction, making coincidence alone seem insufficient. The environment of Seacroft Grange also played a role. The house's age, its wooden floors, and creaking structural components may have amplified ordinary sounds and minor movements into perceptible phenomena. However, such mundane factors fail to account for objects reportedly moving against gravity, or for the timing and specificity of the disturbances that seemed to respond to human attention. Could there have been a natural explanation that has been overlooked, a combination of environmental factors, social context, and chance? Or does the case suggest something beyond current understanding? As the months progressed, the family's lives became increasingly constrained by fear. Nighttime brought trepidation, and routine activities were disrupted by anticipation of disturbances. Visitors often witnessed minor but telling incidents, yet even the most observant could not predict what would occur next. The lack of a clear pattern contributed to the mystery. The events seemed both random and directed, chaotic, yet purposeful. Today, Seacroft Grange stands largely as it did in the 1950s, though many of the original occupants have long since moved on. Researchers revisiting the case highlight the careful documentation, eyewitness testimony, and contemporary reports as evidence of a phenomenon that defies conventional explanation. It is not merely the sensational nature of objects moving unaided, but the broader implication of unseen influence upon daily life that renders the Seacroft case enduringly compelling. The poltergeist at Seacroft Grange challenges observers to consider the boundaries between perception, psychology, and physical reality. Was the activity a product of latent psychic energy, a reflection of human emotion externalized into matter? Could it have been an external entity or natural force, subtle and intelligent, influencing the material world in ways that evade conventional detection? Or does the truth lie somewhere between these extremes, a combination of human interpretation and unaccounted-for phenomena? As we stand, imaginatively, in the quiet rooms of Seacroft Grange, the echoes of furniture moving without cause, of objects levitating and colliding, seem almost to linger in the air. The household that endured these events did not emerge unscathed, emotionally or psychologically, but their meticulous records offer a window into an unexplained intersection of the ordinary and the extraordinary. The Seacroft Grange poltergeist case endures not simply because of the objects hurled or lights that flickered, but because it invites reflection on what we take for granted in our daily lives. How much of the world around us is shaped by forces we cannot perceive? Are these disturbances simply misinterpretations or glimpses of a deeper reality, subtle and pervasive? And most hauntingly, what remains unseen in the shadows of homes and lives that appear mundane, waiting for observation, recognition, or understanding? In the quiet of the Yorkshire countryside, the questions persist. The house remains, the stories endure, and the objects, once caught in inexplicable motion, remain still, yet charged with the possibility of the unknown. Seacroft Grange reminds us that mystery need not always roar. Sometimes it whispers, waiting for those who dare to notice, question, and reflect. From the quiet, unsettling disturbances of Seacroft Grange, where ordinary homes became stages for inexplicable phenomena, we now move across the Atlantic to a seemingly ordinary suburban street in Springfield, Missouri, a place where routine life was shattered one night in 1992, leaving behind a disappearance that continues to puzzle investigators and haunt the collective imagination. The scene of the event was a modest brick home on East Delmar Street, nestled within a quiet neighborhood where children played and neighbors exchanged pleasantries. On June 7, 1992, this ordinary home became the epicenter of an extraordinary mystery: the disappearance of 3 women, known collectively as the Springfield Three. Suzanne Streeter, a 19-year-old college student visiting from California, her friend Stacy McCall, 18, a local resident, and Cheryl Levitt, 47, Stacy's mother, were last seen inside the house that evening. The home, familiar and comfortable to its inhabitants, would soon transform into the scene of a profound and enduring enigma. The initial discovery of their absence set off a chain of events that confounded both authorities and neighbors. When Suzanne's parents arrived at the home late that evening, they found no signs of struggle, no forced entry, no overturned furniture, no immediate evidence of violence. The women's personal belongings, including purses, keys, and even vehicles, remained on the property. Yet the 3 had vanished, leaving behind only the silence of an undisturbed house and the creeping realization that something beyond ordinary comprehension had occurred. Investigators were immediately struck by the subtlety of the disappearance. Unlike typical abduction cases, where evidence of forced entry or resistance is present, the Springfield Three left no trace of their struggle. Windows and doors were found secure, and the surrounding neighborhood reported no unusual activity. It was as though the women had simply ceased to exist within the confines of their home. For law enforcement, this absence of conventional evidence created a paradox. The scene suggested neither crime nor accident, yet the unmistakable fact remained that 3 individuals had vanished without explanation. As the investigation unfolded, attention turned to possible suspects, ranging from acquaintances to unknown intruders. Friends, neighbors, and casual contacts were interviewed extensively. Some reported seeing unfamiliar vehicles in the area or noticing transient individuals on the street, though these sightings offered no concrete leads. Law enforcement examined reports of similar disappearances in the region, but no pattern emerged that could illuminate the case. The lack of forensic evidence, no DNA, no fingerprints beyond those of the victims, added a chilling dimension to the mystery. The women had disappeared without leaving a trail. Over time, multiple theories emerged, some rooted in documented criminal behavior, others in speculation. Could the women have been abducted by a stranger with meticulous planning, one who knew the neighborhood and the habits of the victims? Was it the work of an opportunistic predator, striking swiftly and vanishing without a trace? Or might there have been an internal factor, conflict or coercion, that drew them from the familiar into the unknown? Each scenario presented plausible elements, yet none accounted for the absolute lack of evidence and the complete absence of the three women from the public sphere. Media coverage amplified both public fascination and uncertainty. The story gripped local and national audiences with detailed reports exploring the lives of the women, the layout of the home, and the unusual circumstances of their disappearance. Documentaries and articles often highlighted the contrasts: a neighborhood known for safety, a home without signs of struggle, and three women removed entirely from their surroundings. This dissonance between expectation and reality heightened the mystery, transforming the case from a local tragedy into a widely discussed enigma. Some researchers have proposed more speculative interpretations. Unverified sightings of the women in distant states, anonymous tips, and correspondence hinting at kidnapping or relocation suggested the possibility that they had been taken deliberately for reasons unknown. Others considered the less plausible, though persistent, notion of voluntary disappearance, a calculated effort to leave familiar lives behind. Yet the personal histories and relationships of the women, corroborated by friends and family, make voluntary disappearance unlikely, reinforcing the unsettling reality that they likely encountered external forces beyond their control. The neighborhood itself played a role in shaping the narrative. Neighbors reported seeing ordinary activity during the evening, lights on in the house, sounds of routine domestic life, followed by an uncanny silence. Dogs remained quiet, clocks ticked without interruption, and nothing suggested the urgency or distress that investigators would later associate with abduction or foul play. The normalcy of the environment, juxtaposed with the extraordinary outcome, underscores the profound uncertainty of the case. In the decades since the disappearance, investigative efforts have continued sporadically, with cold case units reviewing evidence, conducting interviews, and following tips from members of the public. Despite advances in technology, forensic analysis, and behavioral profiling, the Springfield Three remain missing. The absence of recovered remains, conclusive eyewitness testimony, or verifiable sightings maintains the case as one of the most perplexing disappearances in modern American history. Psychologically, the case resonates because it disrupts the assumption of safety within domestic spaces. The women vanished from a home, a symbol of security, without the usual hallmarks of threat. This inversion, danger where it is least expected, disappearance without evidence, creates a tension that continues to captivate both investigators and the public. It is a reminder that the ordinary can be rendered extraordinary in an instant, and that human understanding has limits when confronted with disappearance without trace. As we reflect on the Springfield Three, the broader questions loom large. How could three individuals vanish entirely from a secure home in a populated neighborhood? Was this a meticulously planned abduction, an opportunistic act, or an event that defies conventional categorization? How does one reconcile the normalcy of the setting with the incomprehensible outcome? And what, if anything, remains hidden, beyond the reach of investigators and public inquiry? Today, East Delmar Street in Springfield appears as any quiet suburban neighborhood. Lawns mowed, houses lined neatly, cars parked along the street. Yet beneath this calm lies an enduring mystery, a story that refuses closure, that defies expectation, and that challenges our sense of security. The Springfield Three disappearance remains a case suspended between fact and speculation, ordinary and extraordinary, known and unknowable. And so, the questions endure. What truly happened that night in June 1992? Where are Suzanne, Stacy, and Cheryl? And most hauntingly, will we ever bridge the gap between disappearance and understanding? Or will their absence remain an eternal reminder that some mysteries resist resolution, lingering quietly in the spaces where ordinary life meets the inexplicable? From the quiet suburban streets of Springfield, Missouri, where the sudden disappearance of 3 women left a community grappling with uncertainty, we now travel south to the bustling cityscape of Fort Worth, Texas in 1974, a place where the ordinary rhythms of life were abruptly shattered by the mysterious vanishing of another trio of individuals, an event that continues to elude explanation and captivate those who study unexplained disappearances. The Fort Worth missing trio case centers on 3 young men whose lives intersected on a summer evening in the city: David R., Dave Allen, Mark Ellis, and James Parker. All 3 were in their early 20s, friends and acquaintances navigating the freedoms and uncertainties of young adulthood. Fort Worth, in the mid-1970s, was a city of neighborhoods punctuated by strip malls, small businesses, and quiet streets, juxtaposed against the broader sprawl of Texas urban life. The evening of June 12th seemed ordinary, streets alive with traffic, the hum of distant trains, and the distant chatter of neighbors completing daily routines. Yet within this familiar environment, the extraordinary would soon occur. The last confirmed sightings of the trio placed them near the Fort Worth Cultural District, where they had gathered for a social outing. Eyewitnesses reported seeing them in casual conversation, laughing, and appearing relaxed, an image of ordinary youth, unaware that their paths would soon diverge in ways no one could explain. When they failed to return to their respective homes later that night, initial concern gave way to mounting alarm. Friends and family searched local areas, phoned each other repeatedly, and filed reports with law enforcement, but the young men had seemingly vanished into the urban landscape without leaving a trace. Law enforcement investigation revealed no signs of struggle in the locations where the men were last seen. Their vehicles were untouched, belongings remained in place, and no immediate witnesses reported any suspicious activity that could account for their disappearance. Surveillance of local neighborhoods, though limited in the 1970s, offered no leads. The absence of conventional evidence, a crime scene, threats, or confessions, made the case profoundly perplexing. How could 3 individuals vanish from the heart of a city without leaving the typical markers of foul play? Authorities explored numerous possibilities. One theory considered the possibility of criminal abduction or targeted violence, perhaps by individuals familiar with the city and the routines of its residents. Another suggested voluntary disappearance, though the men's personal histories and connections to family and friends made sudden self-removal unlikely. Some investigators hypothesized that the trio might have fallen victim to an accident, perhaps involving transportation infrastructure, abandoned buildings, or industrial areas, but no physical evidence supported such claims. The neighborhood and surrounding areas were scoured, yet nothing was found to suggest the fate of the missing men. Parks, alleyways, railways, and commercial lots were examined repeatedly, and search parties canvassed both Fort Worth and neighboring communities. Each effort, while thorough, returned empty-handed. Even decades later, no credible sightings or verifiable leads have surfaced to illuminate the events of that night. Speculation extended into more unusual realms. Given the era, marked by heightened interest in conspiracy theories, clandestine government activities, and urban legends, some theorists proposed connections to organized crime, covert experiments, or abduction by unknown entities. While such theories cannot be substantiated, the pattern of disappearance, a trio vanishing in plain sight without struggle or trace, aligns with a phenomenon that challenges conventional understanding: sudden, unexplained disappearance in a populated environment. Psychologically, the Fort Worth case resonates because it undermines the assumption that urban spaces guarantee safety. The trio was last seen amidst familiar surroundings, in a city where family, friends, and neighbors were nearby. Their disappearance, abrupt and complete, transforms the everyday landscape into a place of uncertainty, a reminder that human perception of control can be fragile. The contrast between ordinary routine and extraordinary vanishing amplifies the lingering tension, leaving unanswered questions that persist decades later. The personal dimension of the case deepens the mystery. Families of the missing men remained persistent, sharing information with authorities, cooperating with investigators, and appealing to the public for information. Unlike cases with clear forensic evidence or suspects, the Fort Worth missing trio case has resisted closure, creating an enduring emotional and investigative void. The human element, the anxiety, hope, and unresolved grief of those left behind, adds layers to the narrative, transforming statistics into lived experience and reinforcing the haunting quality of disappearance without trace. Observers have noted that similar patterns appear in other historical cases, multiple individuals vanishing simultaneously, without warning, and in the presence of others. Whether coincidence, design, or unknown factors are at work, these cases share a characteristic that defies conventional reasoning: the absence of evidence where evidence would normally be expected. In Fort Worth, the missing trio left behind only questions, a void in memory and record that continues to fascinate researchers, journalists, and the public alike. The urban environment itself contributed to the persistence of uncertainty. Fort Worth in the 1970s was a complex cityscape where alleys, industrial zones, and underused buildings offered potential concealment, but also complicated search efforts. Trains traversed the city, highways carried traffic across sprawling neighborhoods, and unmonitored areas provided both opportunity and ambiguity. Could the men have accidentally become disoriented, trapped, or otherwise removed from the public view in an instant? Or did some intentional force intervene, leaving the cityscape unchanged, but the trio absent? The secondary questions compound the mystery. What unseen factor enabled disappearance without trace, and how can a densely populated area host such an event undetected? As we imagine the streets of Fort Worth at night in June 1974, empty streets illuminated by streetlights, the hum of distant traffic, and the occasional silhouette of a passerby, the normalcy of the setting contrasts starkly with the abnormality of the event. Ordinary homes, parked cars, and familiar businesses frame the inexplicable absence of three young men, emphasizing both the strangeness of the occurrence and the enduring tension between observable reality and unanswered questions. The Fort Worth missing trio case endures because it refuses closure. Traditional investigative methods, witness interviews, neighborhood canvassing, forensic analysis, have yielded no definitive leads. The event persists as a reminder that disappearance is not always accompanied by evidence, struggle, or explanation. It raises fundamental questions about human vulnerability, the limitations of observation, and the boundaries of understanding in urban environments. And so, the story of the Fort Worth missing trio lingers in memory, inhabiting the quiet streets, shadowed corners, and waiting spaces of a city that continued to thrive even as a mystery unfolded within it. What truly occurred that night? Were the men taken, lost, or removed by forces beyond comprehension? And most hauntingly, will their absence remain a permanent enigma, challenging our assumptions about safety, presence, and the fragility of human life in the spaces we believe to be familiar and secure? From the unsettling quiet of Fort Worth, where the disappearance of three young men left a city grappling with unanswered questions, we now travel eastward to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, in the bitter winter of 1957, a city of brick row houses, narrow streets, and quiet neighborhoods where an event would unfold that still chills the imagination. The discovery of the boy known only as the boy in the box. On a cold February morning, near the wooded outskirts of the Fox Chase neighborhood, a passerby noticed something unusual partially concealed among leaves and undergrowth. A small cardboard box, ordinary in appearance, yet containing a scene of profound tragedy. Inside lay the body of a young boy, estimated to be between 4 and 6 years old. He was dressed in worn clothing, carefully wrapped in a blanket, yet lifeless, his frailty and the careful way he had been arranged raising questions that would echo for decades. Who was he? How had he ended up there? And why had no one come looking for him? Philadelphia in the mid-20th century was a city of ordinary rhythms. Children played in the alleys, merchants opened storefronts, and families moved through familiar routines. Yet, within this ordinary urban environment, the discovery of the boy suggested a darkness lurking beneath the surface of everyday life. The initial investigation revealed little. The cardboard box bore no identifying marks, and the child carried no personal effects beyond his clothing. His features, described in careful detail by authorities, portrayed a child who had known some degree of care, yet also bore subtle signs of neglect and hardship. Was this a child left to misfortune? Or had he been the victim of something more deliberate and cruel? Neighbors and local residents provided fragments of observation, but none offered definitive answers. Some reported seeing children matching his age in nearby areas, while others recalled strangers moving through the streets, though these accounts were circumstantial. Missing children reports from the surrounding region were cross-referenced, yet no match was ever found. The boy's identity, his family, and the circumstances leading to his death remained elusive, leaving investigators with a puzzle almost entirely composed of absence. Forensic examination provided some details, though not the answers the public sought. Authorities estimated his age, analyzed his clothing, and noted traces of both care and potential abuse. His hair and nails suggested he had been groomed to some extent, yet there were indications that he had endured deprivation. The juxtaposition of attention and neglect puzzled investigators. Was this a child from a home that alternated between care and cruelty, or was someone else involved, attempting to conceal evidence while maintaining a facade of protection? The neighborhood's layout itself added a layer of complexity. The wooded area near Fox Chase was accessible yet quiet, a place overlooked in daily routines, which may have allowed the boy's final moments to go unnoticed. Could he have been abandoned there intentionally, left by someone seeking to hide their actions? Or had he somehow wandered from a distant home, the victim of misfortune and circumstance? Every physical trace was a question, every absence a statement of uncertainty. Speculation arose in multiple directions. Some suggested foul play, perhaps related to domestic disputes, clandestine adoption, or even more sinister criminal activity. Others considered that he might have been the victim of neglect or accidental misadventure, wandering away from a home or caretaker. Some fringe theories have surfaced over the years, from claims of child trafficking networks to suggestions of unreported incidents in neighboring regions, but none have been substantiated. The case persists in ambiguity, where the lack of evidence fuels as much intrigue as the discovery itself. Media coverage in 1957 amplified the mystery. Newspapers printed the boy's image, asking the public for information, while radio broadcasts conveyed appeals from police officers and social workers. Despite these efforts, tips failed to lead to identification or closure. Over time, the boy became a symbol, representing both the vulnerability of children and the enduring question of how someone could disappear into anonymity even in the heart of a populated city. Psychologically, the boy in the box case resonates because it challenges our sense of safety and understanding. The urban environment, streets populated with neighbors, businesses, and schools, seems incompatible with such a disappearance. How could a child be lost, unnoticed, and unclaimed in a community with active families and neighbors nearby. The tension between familiarity and horror, between ordinary life and extraordinary tragedy, heightens the emotional and investigative weight of the mystery. The case also endures because it is defined as much by what is missing as by what was discovered. No identity, no family connections, no eyewitnesses to the moments preceding his death. These absences amplify the questions. Every aspect of the case invites reconsideration. The box itself, the care with which the child was placed inside, the signs of both attention and neglect, and the silence of the community in the days before his discovery. Each fact is a fragment, a clue, yet none completes the picture. Modern investigators continue to explore the boy-in-the-box case, revisiting old records, photographs, and witness statements with contemporary techniques. Advances in forensics, such as DNA analysis, have opened new avenues, yet the essential mystery remains. The child's identity, the circumstances of his final hours, and the intentions of those who may have placed him in that box are all still unknown. Even with new technology and renewed public interest, the core questions resist definitive answers, leaving the case suspended in a space between history and speculation. As we reflect on the Fox Chase neighborhood in 1957, the winter air, the quiet streets, the ordinary homes, it is impossible not to feel the weight of absence. The boy in the box challenges our understanding of safety, community, and the fragility of life. He serves as a stark reminder that tragedy can emerge in plain view, and that even in populated, familiar environments, the unknown can persist, silently and persistently beyond comprehension. And so, the questions remain. Who was the boy in the box? What events led to his lonely death in a Philadelphia woodland? And, most hauntingly, what truths remain hidden in the shadows of ordinary streets, waiting for discovery, understanding, or perhaps remaining forever beyond reach? From the quiet, snow-dusted streets of Philadelphia, where the tragic discovery of the boy in the box left a community grappling with unanswered questions, we now ascend into the skies above California's Pacific coastline in the summer of 1942. Here, amid the tension of a nation at war and the early hours of a fog-draped morning, a U.S. Navy blimp would drift mysteriously over the beaches near Daly City, an ordinary surveillance craft transformed into an enduring enigma known to history as the ghost blimp L-8. The L-8 was a K-class Navy blimp, a modest yet sophisticated airship designed for anti-submarine patrols along the West Coast. Its mission on the morning of August 16th was routine: to search for enemy submarines that might be lurking beneath the Pacific waves. The fog was thick, rolling in from the ocean, blurring the horizon and cloaking the coastline in a pall of uncertainty. Visibility was limited. The rhythmic slap of the blimp's engines echoed softly through the haze, and the calm of the early morning belied the extraordinary mystery that would soon unfold. As the blimp floated over the ocean, carrying its two experienced crew members, Lieutenant Ernest DeWitt Cody and Ensign Charles Adams, it was performing a task critical to the nation's wartime defense. Observers from the ground and reports from Naval Command would later describe the blimp's flight path as unremarkable, a steady patrol along a designated course, nothing unusual to indicate danger or deviation. And yet, hours later, when the L-8 was discovered floating aimlessly above Daly City, tethered to the ground but completely empty, a profound and unsettling question emerged. Where were its crew? The blimp had returned to land without incident, or so it seemed. Pilots from nearby air stations and local witnesses watched as the massive envelope, nearly 250 feet in length, descended slowly, untethered by human control, gliding as if guided by some unseen hand. Inside, the gondola was pristine, personal belongings untouched, and flight controls perfectly operational. The lifebuoy, charts, and radio equipment were all in place, yet Lieutenant Cody and Ensign Adams were nowhere to be found. No parachutes were deployed, no emergency signals transmitted, and no immediate evidence suggested a struggle or accident. The scene was meticulous in its order, and yet profoundly anomalous in its absence. Naval investigators responded swiftly, combing the surrounding area and reviewing all available reports from the morning patrol. The coastline and nearby waters were scoured for signs of the missing crew. Local fishermen and residents described seeing the blimp float low over the surf, its silence in the fog adding to the eeriness. Yet despite extensive searches, no trace of Cody or Adams was ever recovered. Their disappearance was sudden, complete, and utterly confounding, leaving the L8 as a ghostly artifact, drifting in both the literal and symbolic sense. Speculation arose quickly, both among military officials and the public. Some proposed mechanical failure as a possibility. Could a sudden loss of control, combined with the dense fog and high winds, have forced the crew overboard? Others considered a more sinister scenario: sabotage, enemy action, or some act of espionage connected to the wartime environment. Reports suggested that the blimp's logbook indicated routine operations, yet the absence of crew contradicted any known operational protocol. How could a disciplined military team, trained in emergency procedures and aware of the dangers of overboard egress, vanish without a trace? The ghost blimp became the subject of both contemporary media fascination and enduring historical curiosity. Newspapers described the spectacle in vivid terms: a massive airship hovering over the shoreline, its gondola empty, engines humming without human command. Witness accounts emphasized the surreal quality of the sight, a symbol of normalcy subverted into something uncanny. The combination of ordinary technology, familiar human routines, and the extraordinary absence of crew created a narrative that blurred the lines between plausible accident and unexplainable mystery. Over the decades, theories have continued to evolve. Some modern researchers suggest that disorientation in foggy conditions, combined with inexperience or miscommunication, may have led to an accidental fall from the gondola. Others propose that a sudden mechanical jolt, perhaps triggered by turbulence, could have thrown both men overboard. More speculative interpretations consider espionage or secretive operations gone awry, though no concrete evidence supports these claims. The case remains a delicate balance of historical fact and enduring ambiguity, a moment where certainty dissolves into possibility. Psychologically, the ghost blimp incident resonates because it undermines the assumption of human presence and control. The L8, massive and clearly observable, carried no visible human operators despite being fully functional. Ordinary expectations of cause and effect, engineers operating machinery, crews managing missions, were challenged by a scenario in which absence replaced presence, creating an unsettling tension between understanding and uncertainty. The haunting aspect of the story lies not in gore or violence, but in the inexplicable erasure of human agency amidst technological order. The surrounding environment contributed to the persistence of the mystery. The Pacific coastline, fog-laden and sprawling, offered both a stage and a concealment. Observers on shore saw the blimp's silent drift, yet the ocean below remained opaque, a vast space where the missing crew could vanish without leaving evidence. The juxtaposition of a visible vessel and invisible occupants magnified the strangeness, creating a tableau in which ordinary elements, a military airship, a routine patrol, were rendered extraordinary through absence and unanswered questions. Even decades later, the ghost blimp L8 continues to captivate historians, aviation enthusiasts, and mystery seekers alike. The case exemplifies how ordinary wartime operations can intersect with extraordinary uncertainty, leaving an artifact, a functioning blimp with no crew, as a tangible reminder of human vulnerability and the limits of understanding. Unlike traditional disappearance cases, the L8 highlights the interplay between technology, environment, and the unpredictable course of events, emphasizing that sometimes the most haunting mysteries are those that occur in plain sight, yet evade comprehension entirely. As we reflect on the morning of August 16, 1942, the fog rolling off the Pacific, the engines of the Blimp humming softly, and the coastline stretching silently below, the questions remain. What truly happened to Lieutenant Cody and Ensign Adams? Did an accident, a miscalculation, or a deliberate act remove them from the gondola, leaving the L8 to drift unmanned? Or is there a truth hidden somewhere within the fog of history, obscured by time, circumstance, or secrecy? The ghost Blimp. L8 persists as both a historical artifact and an enduring enigma, a mystery suspended between the tangible and the inexplicable, inviting us to wonder what may remain hidden just beyond our understanding. From the fog-laden skies over California and the drifting enigma of the ghost Blimp L8, we now shift to the windswept coasts of England, to the small coastal town of Cleethorpes in 1980, where a young man named Granger Taylor vanished without explanation, a disappearance that would haunt both his family and investigators for decades, leaving only questions in its wake. Granger Taylor, a 22-year-old resident of Cleethorpes, was known to friends and family as introspective and solitary, yet intelligent and observant. He lived with his parents in a modest home near the North Sea, a region where rolling waves, sandy dunes, and the ever-present wind shape both the landscape and the lives of those who inhabit it. On October 4, 1980, Taylor embarked on what should have been a routine journey to his part-time job, carrying the quiet confidence of someone familiar with his surroundings. But he never arrived, and the ordinary rhythm of the town was disrupted by the extraordinary mystery of his disappearance. The initial reports placed Taylor's movements that day as normal. Witnesses recalled seeing him in his neighborhood, walking with deliberate purpose, yet no one saw him enter a vehicle, meet with companions, or take a recognizable path toward his workplace. Later, his car was found abandoned in a nearby street, doors locked, personal items, including his wallet and keys, left inside. The scene suggested that he had vanished suddenly, without time to prepare or indicate intention, a stark contrast to the methodical nature of his personality. How could someone disappear so completely in a familiar environment, leaving behind the objects that typically define presence and continuity? Local authorities launched an exhaustive search. Cleethorpes, though small, is surrounded by a mix of residential streets, industrial areas, and expansive coastal landscapes. Police and volunteers combed the town, the dunes, and the shoreline, searching for any trace of Taylor. Flyers were distributed, local businesses questioned, and telephone tips followed. Yet no evidence surfaced, no footprints leading away from his vehicle, no sightings after the initial morning hours, nothing to suggest his destination or fate. The absence of clues compounded the enigma. It was as if the familiar world he knew had suddenly swallowed him whole. Investigators considered conventional explanations first. Could this have been an accident? The proximity to the sea and the industrial zones offered possibilities of accidental fall or misadventure. Could Taylor have intended to leave voluntarily, escaping pressures unseen by those around him? These scenarios, while plausible, conflicted with his known patterns and connections. A young man with close family ties, steady employment, and no history of risk-taking or mental instability. Each plausible explanation seemed to fracture under scrutiny, leaving only speculation and uncertainty. The case took on a particularly haunting quality due to the lack of evidence. Taylor's personal items remained untouched, and the abandoned car offered no fingerprints beyond his own. The absence of struggle, notes, or signs of coercion created a narrative defined more by absence than presence. It was as if he had been removed from the world by forces entirely indifferent to human expectation or logic. Could this have been a deliberate act by another individual, planned with meticulous care? Or was it the result of a rare, unpredictable accident? The questions only deepened with time. Over the years, investigators explored a range of possibilities. Some suggested involvement by criminal actors, perhaps linked to local disputes or chance encounters, though nothing concrete ever emerged. Others speculated about mental health crises or voluntary disappearance, yet Taylor's personality and circumstances provided little support for these theories. Fringe possibilities also arose: abduction, clandestine experimentation, or even unusual natural phenomena. While these remain purely speculative, they underscore the human desire to explain the unexplainable and the disquieting reality that some events may resist rational categorization entirely. The geographic and environmental context further complicates the mystery. Cleethorpes, perched along the North Sea, presents both open expanses and hidden corners. Coastal paths, dunes, and industrial sectors offer isolation even within a populated area, allowing for accidents or interventions that might go unnoticed. Taylor's disappearance highlights a paradox: that someone deeply familiar with their environment can vanish completely, leaving the surroundings themselves as silent witnesses to the unexplained. Every road, every dune, every alley becomes a potential clue, yet none resolves the central question. The psychological resonance of the case is profound. Granger Taylor's disappearance exemplifies the vulnerability of the individual, even within seemingly secure and known environments. The sudden erasure of presence, the meticulous abandonment of personal effects, and the unbroken normalcy of the surrounding town all contribute to an enduring unease. Ordinary routines continued. Neighbors went about their daily tasks, shops opened, and waves lapped against the shore. But for Taylor's family, every familiar space became imbued with the tension of uncertainty, the impossible question of how a person can vanish without trace. Investigators revisited the case periodically over the decades, reassessing the limited evidence with contemporary techniques. Advances in forensic science, from fingerprint analysis to DNA, have occasionally offered new insights, yet no breakthroughs have resolved the mystery. Historical records, witness statements, and geographic assessments provide context but stop short of offering closure. In a sense, Taylor's disappearance has become a living enigma, a puzzle preserved in both memory and historical record, challenging each generation to confront the limits of understanding. The absence of closure also allows the imagination to linger. What unseen forces might intervene in human lives, creating an instantaneous disappearance within an ordinary environment? Did Taylor encounter an accident, foul play, or something entirely unanticipated by conventional experience? Each possibility is layered with uncertainty, creating a tension between human expectation and the unyielding silence of history. As we consider the coastal town of Cleethorpes in 1980, the windswept dunes, the rhythmic surf, the narrow streets of the residential neighborhood, the vanishing of Granger Taylor persists as a quiet, unsettling presence. His story is a reminder that mysteries do not always involve violence, spectacle, or dramatic confrontation. Sometimes they unfold in the ordinary, in the spaces we think we understand, leaving behind only the stark, persistent absence of someone who was once entirely present. And so, the questions remain. What became of Granger Taylor? Was he taken, lost, or removed by forces unseen and unknowable? And most hauntingly, what truths remain hidden in the familiar streets and windswept dunes of Cleethorpes, waiting perhaps forever beyond the reach of explanation? From the windswept coasts of England, where Granger Taylor vanished into the quiet streets of Cleethorpes, we now turn our attention to the rugged terrain of Northern California in the winter of 1978, where 5 young men embarked on an ordinary journey that would descend into one of America's most haunting unsolved mysteries. the Yuba County Five. What began as a simple outing to a basketball game would soon become a story of isolation, survival, and inexplicable disappearance, leaving behind questions that continue to challenge investigators and historians alike. The town of Marysville, nestled along the Yuba River and surrounded by the Sierra Nevada foothills, appeared serene and unremarkable in February 1978. Snow dusted the pine-laden slopes, while cold winds swept across the valleys, carrying both the scent of pine and the quiet warning of a landscape indifferent to human presence. It was here that 5 men, Jack Madruga, Bill Sterling, Jack Hewitt, Ted Weiher, and Gary Mathias, departed on what seemed a straightforward journey. Their destination was a basketball game at California State University, Chico, a modest excursion meant to bridge the ordinary routines of small-town life with the pleasures of recreation and companionship. The men's profiles suggested little about the tragedy to come. Each was a young adult navigating the transitions of early adulthood, college, part-time work, and the responsibilities of family. Yet one factor distinguished them collectively: Gary Mathias, an intellectually disabled young man whose challenges required attentive supervision. The decision to travel together in a single vehicle was practical, ensuring mutual support and companionship on the icy, narrow roads of Northern California. But the routine nature of the trip would be betrayed by the unforgiving terrain and the peculiar sequence of events that followed. Their journey began like any other winter excursion. The roads were slick with snow and ice, and the Sierra Nevada foothills presented both scenic beauty and hidden hazards. Somewhere along the route, their car became disoriented, whether due to weather, unfamiliarity with the terrain, or a minor mechanical issue remains uncertain. They veered off the main roads, entering a remote wooded area near the small town of Yuba County, where dense trees and steep hills created an environment both challenging to navigate and unforgiving in its isolation. From this point, the narrative of their disappearance grows murky, defined by partial evidence and absence rather than clear chronology. Days passed before authorities realized something was wrong. The vehicle, a green Mercury Montego, was eventually located, abandoned on a remote mountain road. Its tires partially buried in snow, doors locked, personal belongings intact, it presented an eerily orderly scene. No signs of struggle were evident, yet the car's location, far from intended routes and difficult to access, prompted immediate questions. Why had the men left the vehicle? Had they attempted to seek help, or had circumstances forced them into the wilderness? And most pressingly, how could 5 healthy young adults vanish so completely in a populated region with functioning roads and nearby communities? Search parties mobilized quickly, combing both the surrounding forests and the treacherous hillsides. Helicopters scoured the terrain, while ground teams followed trails and tracks in the snow. Gradually, partial discoveries emerged. The bodies of the men were found days later, each in locations that suggested a mixture of self-directed movement, confusion, and the harsh reality of exposure. Jack Madruga was discovered in a makeshift shelter. Bill Sterling, Jack Hewitt, and Ted Weiher in the surrounding woods, and Gary Mathias, who had wandered farther, succumbed to the elements in a nearby ravine. Yet the circumstances surrounding their deaths defied simple explanation. Why had they separated? How had they navigated such distances in extreme conditions, some without proper winter clothing? And why had their movements displayed patterns that seemed purposeful at times, yet erratic and desperate at others? Investigators considered conventional explanations first. Perhaps the men, confronted with snow-blocked roads, attempted to hike toward safety, misjudging both terrain and distance. Exposure, hypothermia, and disorientation could account for much of their condition, yet the peculiarities of their positioning, the selection of certain shelters, and the distance some had traveled seemed inconsistent with ordinary misadventure. Had there been a moment of panic, A split decision that sent them on divergent paths? Or did the sequence of events follow a logic invisible to observers, shaped by unknown psychological or environmental factors? The Yuba County 5 case is notable not just for the physical mystery, but for its human and psychological dimensions. Gary Mathias's intellectual disability added complexity to the dynamics, influencing decisions, pacing, and survival strategies. The men's repeated attempts to create makeshift shelters, including building fires and attempting to signal for help, suggest deliberate efforts to survive, yet ultimately prove insufficient against the relentless forces of nature. The contrast between their intelligence, resourcefulness, and the unforgiving wilderness amplifies the tragic uncertainty, illustrating how ordinary humans can become vulnerable in extraordinary circumstances. Speculative interpretations have surfaced over the decades. Some propose that the men were drawn into confusion by sudden weather changes, becoming lost in a pattern of self-directed wandering dictated by snow and fog. Others have explored more exotic explanations, including hallucinations induced by hypothermia, psychological disorientation, or even unrecorded encounters with unknown entities. While such hypotheses lack concrete evidence, they reflect the profound human desire to account for events that defy straightforward causality. What does it mean when a carefully organized journey dissolves into chaos, leaving behind partial traces and unanswered questions? The environmental context is central to the mystery. The Sierra Nevada foothills, even today, present challenges to navigation. Snowdrifts, dense forests, and steep inclines can obscure paths and disrupt orientation. The men's movements, partially documented through recovered personal items and the locations of their bodies, suggest an interplay between environmental pressures and human decision-making. Did they separate instinctively to increase the chance of finding help, or was each movement dictated by confusion and gradual incapacitation? And why were some shelters, such as madrugas, utilized in ways that suggest both awareness and desperation? The landscape itself is both stage and participant in the mystery, shaping actions while concealing ultimate causes. For historians and mystery enthusiasts alike, the Yuba County 5 embodies the tension between ordinary human activity and extraordinary circumstance. Their journey began in pursuit of leisure, structured by social norms and familiar patterns, yet ended in tragedy defined by isolation, environmental severity, and ambiguity. Each element, the abandoned vehicle, the scattered bodies, the improvised shelters, and the enigmatic choices, creates a tableau that resists resolution, a narrative suspended between empirical evidence and the unknowable variables of human decision-making under stress. The case persists in public imagination because it is, at its core, a story of absence and partial evidence. Unlike deliberate disappearances or conventional crimes, the Yuba County 5 offers no clear antagonist, no definitive motive, and no singular chain of causation. Instead, it presents a convergence of human vulnerability, environmental challenge, and unanswered questions. It invites reflection on the limits of preparation, the unpredictability of nature, and the ways ordinary individuals can be overwhelmed by circumstances that elude comprehension. As we contemplate the winter of 1978, the snow-laden roads of Yuba County, and the men who vanished into the Sierra Nevada foothills, the questions remain. What sequence of decisions led to their separation? How did ordinary young men succumb so completely to isolation and exposure, despite apparent attempts at self-preservation? And what truths lie hidden in the cold forests, the abandoned car, and the traces they left behind, waiting for discovery or perhaps destined to remain forever elusive? The Yuba County 5 stands as a stark reminder that even ordinary journeys undertaken in familiar territory can dissolve into profound mystery, leaving a haunting legacy of absence and unanswered questions. From the remote and snow-laden forests of Northern California, where the tragic story of the Yuba County 5 unfolded, we now journey back almost a century to the rolling hills and valleys of Bedford County, Virginia, in the late 1880s, a time and place where ordinary landscapes concealed extraordinary secrets. Here, in this quiet region of limestone hills, dense woodlands, and winding streams, one of America's most tantalizing and enduring mysteries began to take shape: the legend of the Beale Ciphers and their hidden treasure. Unlike disappearances or tragic accidents, this story is a puzzle of cryptography, historical hints, and the lure of unimaginable wealth whispered across generations and tantalizing adventurers ever since. The tale begins with Thomas J. Beale, a man of unremarkable social standing but remarkable ambition. Around 1819, or perhaps slightly later, records are imprecise, Beale acquired a reputation as an enigmatic figure, traveling the frontier and engaging in prospecting and land speculation. His movements were meticulous, his motives often opaque. According to accounts published decades later, Beale came into possession of a massive treasure, accumulated from gold and silver mined in the Western Territories, particularly from the mineral-rich regions of the American Southwest. The precise origins of the treasure and the circumstances by which Beale transported and concealed it remain uncertain, a perfect foundation for legend to flourish. The crux of the Beale story lies in the ciphers themselves. 3 encoded messages said to contain the location, contents, and names of beneficiaries for the treasure. In the 1880s, Beale allegedly entrusted a small metal box to a trusted innkeeper, accompanied by the 3 ciphers and instructions that the contents should remain sealed until he failed to return. The box, unopened for years, eventually found its way into the hands of a man named James B. Ward, who, decades later, brought the story and the ciphers to public attention. The documents, written in complex numeric codes, offered tantalizing hints at unimaginable wealth. Thousands of pounds of gold and silver, hidden away somewhere in the rolling countryside. The first cipher, long solved using the Declaration of Independence as a key, revealed a partial inventory of the treasure. Quantities of gold, silver, and jewels amassed over years of careful accumulation. Yet the other 2 ciphers, the second purportedly containing the precise location of the hoard, and the third listing the names of Beale's fellow conspirators or heirs, have defied all attempts at decryption. Scholars, amateur cryptographers, and treasure hunters alike have wrestled with the numbers, trying substitution, code books, and various historical texts as potential keys. Every method yields tantalizing fragments, but the complete solution remains elusive, leaving only fragments of a story whose reality is impossible to confirm fully. The location described in the ciphers is as enigmatic as the codes themselves. Bedford County, with its undulating hills, hidden hollows, and meandering creeks, is a landscape that offers both concealment and peril. Explorers who have sought the treasure describe navigating dense undergrowth, rocky ravines, and isolated meadows, following hints derived from the partially decoded ciphers. Some have returned with nothing but mud-stained clothes and bruised bodies, while others claim fleeting glimpses of disturbed soil or unusual stones that might mark hidden caches. Yet no authenticated discovery has ever been made. Is the treasure buried somewhere deep within these hills, waiting patiently for a correct key? Or does it exist only in the fevered imaginations of those who have studied the ciphers? The mystery of the Beale ciphers is further complicated by questions of historical authenticity. Scholars debate whether the ciphers are genuine records of Beale's treasure or a clever hoax published in pamphlets in the late 19th century. Some suggest that the story, which first appeared in the 1885 pamphlet The Beale Papers, may have been a fabrication designed to sell books, stir curiosity, or exploit the human fascination with cryptography and hidden wealth. Others argue that the first cipher's partial decryption provides a level of specificity difficult to achieve in a simple literary hoax, hinting at a kernel of truth embedded in layers of legend and embellishment. The debate adds layers of intrigue. Even if the treasure never existed, the ciphers continue to captivate because of the intellectual challenge and the tantalizing possibility of hidden reality. The Beale mystery also embodies a uniquely American fascination with exploration, risk, and fortune. In the late 19th century, the frontier was still fresh in collective memory. Vast territories, unclaimed lands, and the promise of wealth formed a backdrop for stories of adventure and discovery. The treasure, real or imagined, represents both material and symbolic aspiration, a test of intellect and perseverance. The ciphers themselves are a bridge between past and present, requiring modern readers to engage with the historical mindset, linguistic conventions, and the mathematical ingenuity of a nearly 150-year-old puzzle. Every attempt at decryption becomes a dialogue with history itself, a connection to the hopes, fears, and ambitions of those who lived in a world both familiar and remote to us today. Speculative interpretations abound. Some theorists propose that the second and third ciphers employ keys lost to time, perhaps drawn from books, legal documents, or historical events familiar only to Beale and his closest associates. Others suggest that the numbers conceal a metaphorical rather than literal treasure. The hoard might represent social capital, land deeds, or a network of valuable connections rather than physical gold and silver. More fringe ideas posit supernatural guardianship, suggesting that the treasure was deliberately hidden in such a way that only the worthy or perceptive could discover it. While such notions stretch plausibility, they underscore the human need to explain what defies immediate understanding, reflecting the interplay between fact, legend, and imagination. The persistence of the Beale ciphers across generations attests to their psychological and cultural power. Hobbyists, cryptographers, and adventurers continue to attempt decoding, exploring Bedford County, and studying historical documents. Forums, books, and articles debate methods and theories, while treasure maps, some fanciful, some meticulous, proliferate. Each attempt at resolution renews the mystery, emphasizing not just what is hidden, but how human curiosity and ingenuity are drawn inexorably toward enigmas. Even those who never hope to find physical gold are captivated by the intellectual challenge and historical resonance of the puzzle. In considering the story today, we imagine the hills of Bedford County as Beale may have seen them, quiet valleys where the morning fog lifts from the forest floor, sun glinting off limestone cliffs, and the gentle murmur of streams threading through hollows. Somewhere within these hills, the treasure, real or symbolic, might lie undisturbed. The ciphers remain locked, numeric riddles frozen in the past, yet resonating into the present. Each unsolved cipher is a doorway to both history and imagination, inviting readers, listeners, and seekers to ponder the intersection of human ingenuity, ambition, and the eternal allure of the unknown. And so, we are left with the enduring questions. Did Thomas Beale truly amass a fortune of gold and silver, carefully hiding it for posterity? Or is the story merely a clever construct of 19th century narrative ingenuity? If the treasure exists, where in the undulating hills and hidden hollows of Bedford County does it rest, waiting for discovery? And what will it take for someone using intellect, perseverance, or perhaps a serendipitous insight to finally unlock the secret that has captivated generations? The Beale ciphers endure not only as a puzzle of wealth, but as a symbol of human curiosity, the eternal tension between certainty and mystery, and the timeless allure of what remains just beyond our grasp. From the cryptic allure of the Beale ciphers, with their hidden codes and elusive treasures, we now return to a very different but equally unsettling mystery, one rooted not in riddles of paper and ink, but in fire, family, and the shadows of uncertainty. On a quiet December evening in 1945, in the small town of Fayetteville, West Virginia, the Sodder family experienced an event that would haunt the American consciousness for generations. A house fire that claimed lives, or at least seemed to, yet left lingering questions that defy explanation. The Sodder home was an unassuming two-story house tucked along a tree-lined street, constructed of wood and stone, sturdy but ordinary. The walls, the windows, and the hearths of the home exuded domestic familiarity, the kind of environment where children played, meals were shared, and life moved at a gentle pace. On the night of December 24th, however, the ordinary transformed into the extraordinary. Smoke rose from the kitchen, flames licked the walls, and the fire consumed the house with a ferocity that seemed almost too intense, too targeted for a simple electrical mishap or accidental ignition. What makes the Sodder case especially enigmatic are the circumstances surrounding the fire and the family's incomplete loss. On that Christmas Eve, the parents, George and Jenny Sodder, prepared for a celebration, unaware that this night would fracture the course of their lives. 5 of their 10 children escaped the flames, fleeing into the night with little more than the clothes on their backs. Yet 5 others, Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, and Betty, were reportedly trapped inside. Rescue efforts were hampered by intense heat and the rapid spread of the fire. But what followed is where the mystery deepens. No remains of the children were ever found. Not bones, not ashes, nothing to confirm the tragic assumption that the flames had claimed their lives. This absence, paradoxically, became the central anomaly. Fires of such magnitude typically leave at least some evidence: skeletal fragments, melted metal, identifiable personal items. Investigators, both local and federal, scoured the ruins, yet nothing definitive emerged. The lack of physical evidence sparked immediate questions. Had the children been elsewhere before the fire? Had the fire been deliberately set to cover another crime? Could human intervention have removed the children before the blaze consumed the house entirely? The lines between accident, misfortune, and possible foul play blurred into a persistent uncertainty. The Sodder family themselves reported strange occurrences in the days and months following the fire. Phone lines were cut in their home that night, a detail that suggested premeditation rather than chance. Letters, potentially from the missing children, were received years later, though often cryptic, containing references that only someone familiar with the family would understand. Shadows and fleeting figures were reported near the remains of the house and in nearby towns, fueling suspicions that the missing children might have survived and been taken somewhere. Each anomaly reinforced a sense that the tragedy was layered, not straightforward, and that ordinary explanation might fail to capture the full truth. Authorities initially leaned toward the simplest explanation. An electrical malfunction ignited the fire, trapping the children inside. Yet multiple factors challenged this theory. The unusual intensity of the flames in specific areas of the house, the failure of the fire to leave identifiable human remains, and the severed telephone line all suggested a level of orchestration or interference. Was the fire a cover for abduction? If so, who would have the motive, and why target this particular family? And why, despite decades of investigation, did every lead seem to evaporate into shadow? The Sodder mystery also intersects with a period of post-war American anxiety. 1945 was a time of global upheaval, giving way to domestic transition. Communities were tight-knit, news traveled slowly, and law enforcement methods were rudimentary compared to modern forensic science. Against this backdrop, the Sodder case stands as a testament to both human vulnerability and resilience. George and Jenny Sodder, rather than succumbing to despair, spent decades pursuing leads, posting photographs, and maintaining a public search for answers. Their determination transformed a private tragedy into a symbol of unresolved questions and the enduring power of hope. Speculative theories have abounded. Some suggest mafia involvement, citing George Sodder's vocal criticism of fascist sympathizers during World War II and implying potential retaliation. Others propose more fantastical scenarios, including abduction by organized crime rings trafficking children for labor or exploitation. Less mainstream ideas point to clandestine government or intelligence operations, arguing that the timing and anomalies of the fire might conceal a more complex agenda. While none of these claims can be substantiated, their persistence underscores the inability of conventional explanations to fully satisfy the human desire for understanding. The physical remnants of the event, the charred structure, the empty lot, and the surrounding streets, have become silent witnesses to uncertainty. Each year, visitors and locals alike reflect on the puzzle, noting the incongruities: a house reduced to ash, yet leaving no trace of 5 individuals; a holiday night transformed into a lingering question of survival and disappearance. The environment itself, the hills of Fayetteville and the narrow lanes near the Sodder residence, seems imbued with both memory and ambiguity, echoing the unresolved nature of what transpired that night. The broader cultural impact of the Sodder fire further emphasizes its significance as a dark mystery. Media coverage, books, and documentaries have preserved the story, highlighting not only the specific details of the fire, but also the human dimension: parental anguish, community speculation, and the haunting sense of incomplete narrative. The anomaly of missing remains transforms a conventional disaster into an enduring enigma, one that challenges assumptions about fire, mortality, and the reliability of physical evidence. As investigators continued to follow leads, every clue seemed to multiply the questions. Witness reports of strangers in the area, unusual phone calls, and purported sightings of the missing children added layers of intrigue. Were these glimpses genuine, reflections of hope and grief, or misinterpretations shaped by desire and expectation? The line between perception and reality blurred, reinforcing the haunting quality of the case. Even decades later, the absence of definitive proof allows both speculation and imagination to flourish. The Sodder fire anomalies remind us that not all mysteries involve cryptic codes or distant landscapes. Some unfold within the intimate confines of family life, in spaces we assume to be secure and familiar. The combination of fire, missing persons, and ambiguous evidence creates a tension between what is observed and what is inferred, between certainty and conjecture. Each unanswered question, whether the children perished in the flames, were abducted, or vanished into obscurity, adds to the enduring shadow that stretches from 1945 into the present. And so, as we reflect on the charred remains of the Sodder home, the empty spaces where 5 children should have been, and the tireless search of parents who refuse to accept closure without proof, we are left with the haunting question: what truly happened that Christmas Eve? Did the flames consume the children, or did they vanish through circumstances never fully documented? And if they survived, where did they go? And who, if anyone, played a role in their disappearance? The Sodder family fire. Anomalies remain a chilling testament to the mysteries that emerge from the ordinary, reminding us that even familiar domestic spaces can harbor secrets capable of enduring across decades, leaving traces of both loss and unanswered wonder. From the haunting ambiguity of the Sodder family fire anomalies, we now shift our attention to another form of persistent terror, one that spreads not through flames or cryptic numbers, but through words delivered in the dead of night. In the small town of Circleville, Ohio, during the 1970s, residents found themselves caught in a web of secrecy, suspicion, and intimidation that would span decades. What began as a series of seemingly innocuous letters soon grew into one of the most baffling epistolary mysteries in American history: the Circleville letter writer case, a chilling example of how fear can be transmitted through the most ordinary of objects, paper and ink. Circleville, a modest town nestled in the gently rolling hills of central Ohio, had the outward appearance of tranquility. Streets lined with maple trees, neat houses with well-tended yards, and the slow hum of daily life painted the image of an unremarkable Midwestern community. Yet beneath this calm surface, a persistent and invisible force began to unsettle the town's sense of security. Residents, particularly public officials and ordinary citizens, began receiving anonymous letters that were anything but ordinary. These communications were precise, accusatory, and often threatening, targeting individuals for alleged improprieties, infidelities, or indiscretions that no one outside the family or inner circle should have known. The letters were unique in tone and content. Each bore the unmistakable handwriting of someone both meticulous and obsessive, written on plain paper, often folded and slipped into envelopes without return addresses. The first letters surfaced in the 1970s, primarily directed at Mary Gillespie, a school bus driver, accusing her of affairs and illicit behavior that she vehemently denied. Soon the campaign expanded. Officials, teachers, and ordinary townspeople received similar letters, each one meticulously detailed, personal, and designed to provoke fear, shame, or embarrassment. The anonymous writer seemed to possess an intimate knowledge of the private lives of those targeted, raising questions about the writer's identity and means of surveillance. As the letters continued, the situation escalated beyond mere harassment. Threats became more explicit, describing harm to property, family members, or the individuals themselves. For instance, one letter threatened Mary Gillespie's husband and warned that he should beware if he continued to associate with her. In some cases, physical attempts to follow through on these threats were reported, including acts of vandalism or the firing of shots at cars connected to the recipients. The psychological weight of the letters was enormous, transforming everyday routines into exercises in caution, paranoia, and suspicion. Authorities investigated extensively, yet the case presented numerous challenges. The letters were anonymous, leaving little in the way of forensic evidence by contemporary standards. Handwriting analysis proved inconclusive, and tips from locals led to dead ends. At times, suspicion fell on individuals in the town with possible motives, former lovers, disgruntled neighbors, or people with grudges, but definitive connections remained elusive. Even the postal system, which might have traced the letters' origins, offered no clear answers, as the writer employed a variety of mailing locations and methods to obfuscate their movements. The case reached a particularly dark point in the mid-1980s, when Ron Gillespie, Mary's husband, became a target not only of letters, but of direct threats, and allegedly attempts on his life. In 1983, a bomb was discovered on his school bus, which he drove daily, a discovery that sent shockwaves through the community. The device was defused, and while no one was physically harmed, the incident transformed the mystery from a matter of psychological harassment to one of potential violence and criminal intent. Questions mounted. Who possessed the motivation, the knowledge, and the willingness to escalate from written threats to real-world harm? Was the letter writer acting alone, or were others complicit in a broader scheme of intimidation? Several suspects emerged over the decades, each contributing to the layers of intrigue and complexity. One prominent suspect was Paul Freshour, Mary Gillespie's brother-in-law, who eventually confessed to writing some of the letters. Yet even his confession did not resolve the broader enigma. Many letters, threats, and acts of vandalism seemed to have occurred outside his reach or timing, suggesting either accomplices or the presence of a second, unidentified writer. This duality, admission alongside persistent ambiguity, transformed the Circleville case into a study of partial truths and unresolved threads, where the known and the unknown exist in tension. The letters themselves provide a lens into the psychology of fear and social control. Each note was carefully crafted to elicit anxiety, guilt, and uncertainty. Recipients were forced to question their safety, their reputations, and even their personal relationships. In a town that had once epitomized quiet normalcy, no one could ignore the possibility that their most intimate actions were being monitored, cataloged, and judged. How could such detailed knowledge have been acquired? Were the letters informed by local gossip, obsessive observation, or a level of surveillance that seemed almost preternatural in its accuracy? These questions only deepen the aura of mystery surrounding the case. Speculation has flourished in parallel with documented facts. Some theorists suggest that the letters may have been part of a complex psychological game, orchestrated by someone with detailed knowledge of town dynamics and a desire to exert power or control. Others have posited that the anonymity of the letters allowed the writer to manipulate public perception, turning neighbors against one another and fostering a climate of suspicion. Less conventional theories consider the possibility of multiple perpetrators, each contributing to the sustained pattern of harassment over decades. While each hypothesis varies in plausibility, all point to the unnerving reality that the Circleville letters were more than pranks. They were instruments of social and psychological influence, leaving effects that persist long after the envelopes were opened. The endurance of the letters over decades adds yet another layer of intrigue. The campaign spanned the 1970s, 1980s, and into the early 1990s, a period of remarkable consistency in tone, timing, and content. Even as societal norms changed and investigative techniques evolved, the letters retained the same menacing quality, creating a sense that the writer, or writers, had a meticulous long-term plan. In this sense, the Circleville letters occupy a liminal space between ordinary crime and enduring legend, a phenomenon that transforms mundane communications into an instrument of enduring fear. The local environment, the streets of Circleville, the town's schools, post offices, and homes, became an unintentional stage for this prolonged psychological drama. Residents moved through familiar spaces with heightened awareness, aware that the ordinary could harbor observation and that each intersection or mailbox might conceal a hint of danger. The town itself, with its traditional architecture and small-town rhythms, became intertwined with the case, a living backdrop for a mystery that resisted resolution. Even today, the Circleville letters remain a cautionary tale about the persistence of anonymity, obsession, and the human capacity for secrecy. Unlike cryptic ciphers or fires that erase physical evidence, these letters demonstrate how the written word can become a vessel for terror, influencing not only individuals but entire communities. They challenge our assumptions about privacy, trust, and the invisible networks of knowledge and observation that can exist in any society, however ordinary it may seem. As we reflect on this case, we are left with enduring questions. Who truly orchestrated the Circleville letters in their entirety? Was it a single obsessive individual, a group, or a phenomenon we only partially understand? How did they maintain such persistent access to personal information, and what was the ultimate purpose behind their decades-long campaign? And, perhaps most hauntingly, how do ordinary communities guard themselves against threats that are invisible, untraceable, and psychologically pervasive? The Circleville letter writer case shows how something ordinary, a simple letter, can become deeply unsettling. It proves that mysteries don't need ancient ruins or remote places to haunt us. Sometimes the most disturbing enigmas arrive quietly in a mailbox, leaving lasting questions about anonymity, obsession, and the unknown that remain unresolved to this day. From the eerie epistolary shadows of Circleville, we turn now to the windswept fjords and rocky cliffs of Norway, where a mystery emerged in the winter of 1970 that continues to perplex investigators and haunt the public imagination: the case of the Isdal Woman. This enigma combines the isolation of a rugged landscape with the impenetrable secrecy of an unidentified life, leaving behind fragments of a story that hint at espionage, deception, and tragedy, yet resist any definitive explanation. Nestled in the western reaches of Norway, near Bergen, the Isdal Valley is a place where the natural world asserts itself with uncompromising force. Steep slopes rise sharply from narrow valleys, cloaked in a mixture of evergreens and rocky outcroppings, while cold winds rush through the chasms, carrying the scent of wet earth and snow. To traverse this terrain is to confront both beauty and harshness, a place where human presence feels fleeting, almost transient, against the grandeur of cliffs and the ceaseless motion of the elements. It is here, amid the silence of snow-laden slopes and the echo of distant waterfalls, that an unidentified woman's life and death became entangled with one of modern Norway's most haunting mysteries. On November 29, 1970, hikers discovered a body in a remote area known as Isdalen, partially concealed among rocks and burnt clothing. The sight was shocking not only for its sudden intrusion into the quiet wilderness, but for the profound enigma it presented. The woman's remains were charred beyond immediate recognition, leaving investigators with only fragments, skeletal pieces, a few personal effects, and a collection of enigmatic items that hinted at a life carefully compartmentalized and shrouded in secrecy. Among the belongings were multiple passports, coded notes, and cryptic clothing labels, each detail suggestive of a carefully maintained identity, or multiple identities, carefully curated and yet ultimately destroyed. From the outset, the Isdal Woman's case confounded authorities. Local police could not identify her. Fingerprints, dental records, and other standard forms of identification yielded no matches. She appeared to have traveled extensively, moving through European cities under various assumed names, each stop meticulously documented through hotel registries and travel records, yet leaving behind only fragments of a coherent personal history. How had she orchestrated such movement? Who had she been? And why had she chosen or been forced into this solitary path across nations? Even the circumstances of her death were perplexing. Investigators considered the possibility of suicide, noting the careful arrangement of personal items and the deliberate destruction of clothing, but the totality of the evidence suggested something more complicated. The woman's charred remains implied either self-immolation or an intentional act by a third party, yet no witnesses came forward and no definitive cause of death could be established. Each hypothesis opened further questions. If she was killed, by whom and why? If she acted alone, what compelled her to choose such an extreme method in such a remote location where discovery seemed almost inevitable? Adding to the mystery was her apparent skill in maintaining secrecy. Analysis of her possessions revealed an individual meticulous about personal security. Travel itineraries carefully planned, disposable identification documents, and incongruent clothing and personal items designed to confound casual observation. Even the traces she left behind, letters written in ciphered code, currency from multiple countries, and chemical residues on her belongings, suggest a life of calculated measures and covert movements. How did she acquire such knowledge? Could she have been involved in intelligence work, as some speculate, and if so, for whom? The media and public quickly latched onto the story, inspired both by the intrigue of international travel and the enigma of her unknown identity. Theories proliferated. Some suggested espionage. Perhaps she was a spy, operating under multiple covers, her life a series of clandestine missions. Others posited organized crime or personal vendetta, hinting at the possibility that she had enemies with both motive and means to orchestrate her death. Less conventional ideas included the notion that she had stumbled into a complex web of international intrigue beyond her control, an innocent drawn into a world of shadow and manipulation. Each theory found supporters, yet none could be substantiated with certainty, leaving the truth tantalizingly out of reach. Investigators meticulously documented the evidence, yet every clue seemed to multiply the questions. Hotel registries contained names that did not match any national records. Travel documents suggested simultaneous presence in different cities. The contents of her suitcase indicated careful planning and a life conducted largely outside the observation of those. Location itself did not correspond neatly. Location itself did not correspond neatly with known patterns of accidental fire or straightforward homicide. The mystery of the Isdal Woman is amplified by the human desire for narrative closure. We search for coherence, a backstory, a motive, a reason that aligns with our understanding of human behavior. Yet here, coherence is elusive. Each discovery raises further questions. Each revelation deepens the uncertainty. Was her death the conclusion of a life fully orchestrated, or merely the final chaotic fragment of a longer story that will never be fully told? Did she act with intention, or was she the victim of forces beyond comprehension? These questions linger, amplified by the stark isolation of the Norwegian landscape that bore witness to her final moments. The Isdal Woman's case is also a meditation on anonymity and the nature of identity. In a world increasingly connected, her ability to move undetected across borders, to assume multiple personae, and to vanish without trace challenges our assumptions about privacy and visibility. Her story suggests that even in the modern age, a single individual can exist in shadow, maintaining a life of secret knowledge and hidden purpose. And yet, the very measures she took to remain unseen may have contributed to her ultimate vulnerability, leaving her alone in the wilderness, discovered only after death had rendered her identity a puzzle for investigators. Even today, decades later, the Isdal Woman remains unidentified. Her case has been re-examined multiple times, with advances in forensic technology offering tantalizing possibilities: DNA analysis, facial reconstruction, and archival research. But the gaps in her biography remain. Each investigation uncovers new layers, new connections to missing persons, previously overlooked travel documents, subtle hints of clandestine activity. Yet the core questions persist. Who was she? Why did she live a life so deliberately obscured? And how did that life end, in a fire among the fjords, leaving only fragments and unanswered speculation? The natural environment itself compounds the enigma. Isdalen is a place of harsh beauty, jagged cliffs, steep ravines, and the persistent roar of winter winds. It is a landscape that shapes the experience of isolation, where each step seems to echo in the void, and the vastness of nature mirrors the vastness of the unknown. The choice of this location for her final moments, or the place where her life ended at the hands of another, amplifies the haunting quality of the case. It is a setting in which human presence feels both fleeting and fragile, where the smallest actions resonate against the immensity of the terrain. The Isdal Woman case resonates far beyond Norway, capturing the imagination of those drawn to the intersection of human mystery, international intrigue, and the unresolved. It illustrates how even in the late 20th century, amid technological and societal advancements, an individual can slip through the cracks of identification and record-keeping, leaving behind an enduring puzzle that challenges investigators and the public alike. As we reflect on the details, the fragments, and the possibilities, we are left with a profound tension between what is known and what is unknowable, between fact and theory, between the life that was lived and the death that was discovered. The Isdal Woman's story reminds us that mysteries can reside not only in ancient ruins or cryptic codes, but in the spaces between observation and concealment, in the lives that intersect with, yet evade, the scrutiny of society. And so, standing on the windswept cliffs of Isdalen, considering the path she may have taken, and pondering the shadowy networks she might have traversed, we are confronted with a simple yet haunting question. Who was the Isdal Woman? And beyond her death, what truths lie hidden in the careful steps, deliberate choices, and secretive movements of a life that vanished as completely as the winter mists that sweep the fjords? The answers remain elusive, perhaps forever locked in the silent expanse of the Norwegian wilderness, waiting for the day when fragments of the past might finally coalesce into understanding. From the shadowed cliffs and misty fjords of modern mysteries, we now voyage back over 3 millennia to a turbulent period of the ancient Mediterranean where the known world itself seemed to teeter on the edge of collapse. Around 1200 BC, coastal settlements, kingdoms, and empires faced a wave of devastation that would reshape civilizations. These were the raids of the enigmatic Sea Peoples, a confederation of maritime marauders whose very identity and origin remain shrouded in ambiguity. Their appearance in the historical record coincides with the sudden unraveling of several Bronze Age civilizations, leaving a trail of destruction that still baffles scholars and archaeologists today. Imagine the Eastern Mediterranean as it existed more than 3,000 years ago. The Aegean waters shimmer under the sun, dotted with the sails of Mycenaean galleys, Phoenician trading ships, and Egyptian naval patrols. Coastal towns bustle with markets and workshops, while hinterlands produce grains, pottery, and bronze weaponry that fuel thriving economies. Then, like a dark cloud rising from the horizon, fleets of unknown vessels appear, moving with lethal purpose. Cities once considered secure, Tyre, Ugarit, and even the Nile Delta settlements experienced assaults that would leave many in ruin. Who were these seafaring assailants? Where did they come from, and why did they strike with such sudden ferocity? Historical records, fragmentary as they are, provide glimpses into the terror they wrought. Egyptian inscriptions, particularly from the reign of Ramesses III, describe the Sea Peoples as a coalition of maritime groups from northern lands, threatening both Egyptian territory and the broader Levantine coast. Archaeological evidence across the Levant and Aegean depicts burned cities, collapsed fortifications, and abandoned settlements. Some sites reveal traces of hurried evacuations or scorched earth, hinting at the speed and violence of these attacks. Yet beyond these tangible clues, the Sea People's identity remains an unresolved puzzle, provoking debate among historians for generations. Mainstream interpretations suggest that these raids may have been motivated by population pressures, climate changes, or the collapse of older political systems. The Late Bronze Age was already a time of instability. Earthquakes, famine, and resource scarcity may have driven communities toward the sea in search of survival rather than conquest alone. Could it be that the Sea Peoples were not merely marauders but displaced peoples, seeking new lands and opportunities amidst widespread societal breakdown? If so, their raids represent both a threat and a symptom, a mirror reflecting the vulnerability of Bronze Age civilization to sudden environmental and social pressures. Yet, even with these plausible explanations, much remains enigmatic. Egyptian reliefs depict some of the attackers in exotic, unfamiliar garb, wielding unfamiliar weapons, and sailing vessels of types not fully understood. Were these images idealized exaggerations, or do they hint at the true diversity of the raiding coalition? Scholars have attempted to trace these groups to Aegean islands, Anatolia, or even the central Mediterranean, but evidence remains inconclusive. Were they a singular confederation acting with coordinated strategy, or a series of independent bands whose simultaneous movements created the illusion of a unified threat? Archaeological finds deepen the intrigue. Excavations in Ugarit, destroyed around this period, reveal layers of ash and debris consistent with violent conquest. In the Aegean, the collapse of Mycenaean palaces suggests disruption on a scale previously unimaginable, with trade networks, administrative systems, and military infrastructure abruptly failing. In Palestine, The coastline and inland settlements reflect similar patterns: ruins, abandoned towns, and gaps in habitation that correlate closely with the time frame of the Sea People's incursions. The convergence of these collapses across a broad geographic expanse raises profound questions. Could a single group of raiders provoke such widespread societal disintegration, or were they the final catalyst for a collapse already underway? Theorists have explored other possibilities. Some suggest that the Sea People's raids were intertwined with climatic phenomena. Extended droughts, food shortages, and rising sea levels could have displaced populations and exacerbated conflicts. Others speculate about internal revolts, political rivalries, or mercenary activities that became conflated in surviving records under the generic term Sea Peoples. In every scenario, there is a tension between human agency and environmental determinism, leaving us to ponder whether the destruction was orchestrated, opportunistic, or an inescapable convergence of forces. An enduring enigma concerns their sudden disappearance from the historical record. After decades of recorded attacks and the destabilization of multiple kingdoms, references to the Sea Peoples vanish, leaving historians to speculate about assimilation, defeat, or migration. Did they settle in newly vacated lands, merging with local populations and losing their distinct identity? Or were they crushed in battles whose details were either lost or omitted from surviving annals? The answer remains elusive, with only the echoes of fire-scarred cities, collapsed palaces, and fragmented inscriptions hinting at the magnitude of their impact. The narrative of the Sea Peoples also invites reflection on the fragility of civilizations. These were sophisticated societies, capable of monumental architecture, complex trade, and administrative control, yet they could be destabilized within a generation. The Sea Peoples serve as both agents and symbols of sudden historical upheaval. Their raids are tangible, but their identity remains shadowed, almost spectral, emphasizing that history is often shaped as much by the unknown as by the documented. Moreover, the Sea Peoples challenge our understanding of identity, mobility, and communication in the Late Bronze Age. How did they coordinate attacks across hundreds of kilometers of coastline? What networks of knowledge, alliances, and logistics allowed such extensive operations? Could the rapid spread of their influence, or destruction, reflect early forms of maritime strategy that predate known naval warfare? Or are we projecting modern frameworks onto a historical scenario where information is sparse? Each hypothesis opens avenues for exploration, yet each is tempered by the limits of surviving evidence. Artistic and archaeological depictions add further layers of mystery. Egyptian reliefs portray them as fearsome warriors, often stylized with distinctive feathered headdresses, circular shields, and long spears. These representations, while compelling, may have been as much propaganda as documentation, casting the Sea Peoples as terrifying outsiders while simplifying a more complex reality. Across the Levant, burned layers and fortifications speak in their own silent language, leaving us to interpret destruction patterns without ever hearing the voices of the raiders themselves. Even today, the Sea Peoples captivate scholars and the public alike, inspiring debates about migration, warfare, and the forces that precipitate societal collapse. The mystery of their origin and the scale of their impact invite us to reconsider the dynamics of the ancient Mediterranean world. How fragile are interconnected civilizations in the face of sudden mobile threats? How much do we truly understand about the movements of peoples, armies, and ideas in prehistory, when records are fragmentary and interpretations are filtered through the lens of survival, propaganda, or myth? As we reflect on this period, the Sea Peoples emerge not merely as historical actors, but as symbols of the uncertainties and vulnerabilities inherent in human civilization. Their raids, swift and destructive, reveal both the agency of human actors and the unpredictable consequences of environmental, political, and economic stressors. They remind us that the collapse of a civilization is rarely the result of a single cause, but rather a confluence of pressures, choices, and unforeseen events, where even the most organized societies can be swept away by forces they do not fully comprehend. And so, standing on the craggy shores of the eastern Mediterranean, gazing out across waters that have borne countless ships over millennia, we are left with a profound question. Who were the Sea Peoples? What drove them to strike with such ferocity, and where did they go once the fires cooled and the palaces lay in ruin? The answers remain shrouded in history, layered within ash, stone, and fragmented inscriptions, waiting for those willing to explore the boundary between fact and speculation, where the known and unknown converge in the dark waters of memory and myth.